Hello and welcome to the special broadcast. Amidst the political turmoil over former US President Donald Trump's indictment in the hush money scandal involving porn star Stormy Daniels, this is the first time in American history that a current or former president has faced criminal charges. The case pertains to Stormy Daniels, who says she had an affair with Donald Trump in 2006, which he, that is Mr. Trump, has always denied. In fact, in 2016, she tried to sell her account of what happened to the media as well. Trump's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid her $130,000 to keep it quiet. That is not illegal. But what has got Trump into trouble is how Cohen's reimbursement was recorded in his accounts. He is accused of falsifying his business records by saying the payment was for legal fees. As the payment in elections, Donald Trump's cavalcade has now started moving as he will be going to New York City for appearing before the Manhattan court. Trump is accused of violating election finance laws. There will now be a trial where Donald Trump will make his case. New York City police has thrown up metal barriers around Trump Tower and blocked roads near the Manhattan Criminal Courthouse as they brace for potential protests ahead of Donald Trump's expected surrender. The man who spent 4 years in the White House will be fingerprinted, given a mugshot photo, and brought before a judge. This is happening as he campaigns to become president again in 2024 elections. And despite a criminal charge, Donald Trump can still fight the 2024 presidential elections. So this indictment doesn't really stop him from contesting the upcoming polls in 2024. Donald Trump and his allies have already torn into District Attorney Alvin Bragg and the grand jury's decision, blasting it as political persecution and election interference. The New York Young Republican Club says it is planning a protest at a park across the street from the courthouse. Before Trump departs for New York, which he has already done, listen in to the message he sent to the nation.
We are now officially a third world country. No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks. But they only attack me because I fight for you. It's very simple. They can't buy me and they can't control me, and that scares them beyond belief. Since the very beginning, I've shunned the globalist special interest donors who have made a fortune off of destroying our country. Instead, our presidential campaign has always been funded by grassroots patriots like you. Your contribution today will show the left that nothing can destroy the greatest political movement in history. This is the greatest movement in political history. There's never been anything like it. Even the fake news media, when they hear me say that, they can't challenge it because it's true. And you think about what we did in 2016, and then we did even better by many millions and millions of votes in 2020, but the election was rigged and stolen. But now we're going to take back our country in 2024. If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, it would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it, because they're going to have billions of dollars fighting to make this a communist country, and that's what they're doing. They skipped socialism. The train didn't stop at that station. In just a couple of years, our country is going to be richer, stronger, and greater than ever before. But that's only if we win in 2024. Otherwise, our country will continue to fail. Our country will be a disaster.
And Donald Trump, in fact, spent the weekend before his history-making arraignment playing golf, posting on social media, meeting with his advisors, and calling texting allies to tout political positives of his recent indictment. What really explains this confidence? Is this case weak? And does Mr. Trump's team actually feel that they can beat it? Let me take these questions to experts who are joining me live. Sanjay Suri is live with us. We also have Kelvin Dark, Democratic strategist from Washington, D.C. What explains Donald Trump's confidence? Sanjay.
Well, the first thing that explains Trump's confidence is that Trump is Trump. He's all sorts of things, he's not, but he's never short of confidence.
Yes.
The fact is that the reason for that sort of confidence that Trump has exhibited, and which he will exhibit even more strongly after the procedure on Tuesday, is that he is quite confident that he will prevail. That confidence, looking at the facts of the procedure so far, would seem a little less warranted than Trump's tone suggests. We have an indictment that has been passed by a grand jury. That is to say that there's a number of jurors who have looked at the prosecution evidence, studied it at great length, and decided that there is a case that is made out. It is not simply a prosecutor filing a charge sheet before a court. That has been processed, as is the tradition and as is the legal requirement in New York State, certainly through this grand jury.
Okay.
This has been vetted. Of course, a grand jury is short of a trial jury. That stage would come later. But already we know this much, that there has been a critical assessment, and at least the majority of these jurors on the grand jury have decided that there is a case to prosecute. Further, when we look at the record of, sorry, you were saying?
Yes, Sanjay, who all are accompanying Donald Trump to New York from his family? Is Melania with him?
Trump's aides, of course, his political supporters, his legal team primarily. It will be for the legal team, and we already know from the legal team that they are going to take a plea of not guilty. Hardly surprising. It is the legal team that will seek to challenge the case presented by the prosecution. And that case is strengthened not just because it's been processed through a grand jury, but also we know that Michael Cohen, who actually funneled the money, was imprisoned for it. And we also know that some of the checks that he received were signed by Donald Trump. So there would be a clear legal case that Trump was a part of the entire transaction that led to the conviction of Cohen. And this will no doubt be a factor among several others that the legal team accompanying him will present to the court.
And Kelvin, last week, Donald Trump had gone on to say that the judge hates him. Do you think this will complicate matters for him?
It may complicate matters for him. Let's keep in mind that he has said that about every judge that he has ever appeared for since he became president. As you'll probably recall, he said the same thing about a judge in 2016 and 17. At that time, he said he didn't like the judge origin. So this is out of the normal Trump playbook to say that it's a witch hunt, that the judge hates him. Now, the difference is in this case is it could make things more difficult. Some of the things that he's saying, some of the things that he's posted could easily be construed as intimidation and threats even. There was a picture of him with a baseball bat and then the picture of Alvin Bragg, the DA. So I think that any of those types of comments and actions and insinuations are going to be a big challenge for him and his legal team.
What we will be witnessing, Kevin, is clearly some extraordinary scenes which will be seen as unprecedented in the next few hours. What is likely to play out?
Well, I think today what we're going to see is what are the crowds looking like that are coming to support or not support former President Trump, outside of Trump Tower in New York, anywhere near the courthouse in Manhattan. We saw that earlier this morning, the mayor and local officials talked about all of the security measures in place. I think that they looked at January 6th, what happened here in Washington, D.C., and they're doing everything they can to prevent any protests from becoming violent or disruptive. I'm sure that the same thing is happening here in Washington, D.C. What we can expect from Trump today is I don't think he's scheduled to speak at all, until after tomorrow. He'll probably put things on social media. You can definitely be sure that his lawyers and his defenders, particularly those in the House of Representatives, will be out in full force on TV, defending him, calling this a political persecution, even though they don't even know what the charges are, and basically defending, what Trump has been saying. I think that's what we'll see from now until the arraignment tomorrow.
Yes, and the 45th president is expected to turn himself in on Tuesday, that is in the next few hours, and the stage where he built his legend as a brash popular culture figure and a real estate magnate. But what happens now will be something very interesting to wait and see. When we say extraordinary scenes, Sanjay, is there a possibility of some kind of protests that could take place when Donald Trump actually turns in?
Well, that is always a possibility. Certainly, that's a possibility that Donald Trump would very much welcome, even solicit, or even campaign for. But it does not appear that we will see anything like the January 6th kind of turnout at the courthouse. This is now late enough in the day. Had something like that been planned, or was something like that imminent, it's likely that we would have seen some signs emerging of some such assault, if you like, on the courthouse and the district attorney's office. It is not likely that we are going to see those scenes replay, and of course Trump's critics will seek to interpret that and project that as a sign that the support for him is no longer what it was, or what it was claimed to be, or what it was mobilized to be on that occasion.
Yes, and this is a very unique political territory that the US finds itself in, Calvin. And the big question now is that this entire charge of a witch hunt, if you look at the surveys that have been done over the last 1 week, it does show that a significant number feels that that perhaps the Democratic government did go a little too far.
Well, we have to keep in mind that everything can't be a witch hunt. Everything that's ever been done against former President Trump since he became president, and even before, he's called a witch hunt. So at some point you lose credibility when nothing is legitimate. And I think that one of the things we've seen are some of the Republican rivals, declared and undeclared, for the presidential nomination in 2024. They've come out, except for one, Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, they've come out in support of Donald Trump on the question of this being a political prosecution. But we have to keep in mind that this was voted on by a majority of grand jurors who were citizens of New York, that we haven't seen what the charges are, or really what all the evidence is. So it would be so premature to call it politically motivated and a witch hunt when we don't even exactly know what he's going to be charged with or what evidence there is. But we should expect that definitely Trump and his most ardent supporters are going to continue to say that, regardless of whether that matches up with the facts.
And what are the possibility of the former president actually delivering a speech?
Well, I think that what's expected is after the arraignment tomorrow, when he goes back to Mar-a-Lago in Florida, I believe that there's a speech planned, and I think that will be very interesting to watch, because not only is Donald Trump the former president, but he is the current front runner for the 2024 Republican nomination for the presidency. And we know that Donald Trump has no filter. Most people who are involved in a criminal proceeding would follow their lawyer's advice and be very circumspect about what they say and do. We will probably not see that with Donald Trump. It's going to be something that I hope doesn't involve threats, intimidation, interference, but it's probably going to be a lot of like the recorded speech that he gave that you played earlier, where he's going to put out his version of the facts, which aren't necessarily the facts, say he's being persecuted, and incite his followers to support him and protest.
And Kelvin, I was looking at some details that were coming in, and they seem to suggest that, and this is from the fundraising members, and the numbers that are coming in from there is certainly saying that Trump is getting a political boost from this attention. That 60% of Americans approved of this indictment, although about 3/4 of respondents believe that politics played at least some role in this decision, including 52% who said that it played a major role.
I think that the fundraising element is key, because let's just think about this for a moment. You got Donald Trump, who claims to be a billionaire, who is soliciting funding to help with his campaign and his legal battles from people who are giving, I think the average was $38. So imagine that. We have people in this country that are giving a billionaire money for his personal legal troubles in his campaign. I believe that that's a major part of why he's even running, is to, one, he thinks this will shield him from some of the legal consequences, and so we can raise money. I don't think that the fundraising is any indication that most Americans support him. I do think it is an indication that his supporters continue to ardently support him. And even Republicans who don't really like him in this moment are supporting him because they believe it's a political prosecution. But what I think we need to remember, I think that will change as time goes on. Because for a lot of Republicans, even if they support Donald Trump, they know that it will be even more difficult to win the White House in 2024 with a nominee who's under indictment, possibly in the middle of a criminal trial. And the Republicans that want to win, I think they will slowly but surely withdraw their support for the former president.
But Kelvin, I've been reading some articles, and legal experts, without having seen the still sealed indictment, have questioned whether a case that appears to revolve around infringement of accounting practices and possible campaign finance violations is sufficiently serious to merit the historical step of indicting a former president who is already running again.
I think those are legitimate questions, but I think that those will have to be answered by the district attorney, Alvin Bragg. He was elected. I don't know his reasoning behind it, and I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to speculate on the strength of the case, but I feel pretty confident in the fact that Alvin Bragg knows how serious this is, that it's not just the particular crimes that President Trump may have committed, but that this is the first criminal indictment of a current or former president. So I know that he's thought about that. And like I said, also to keep in mind, this was an indictment that was voted on by a grand jury. So it remains to be seen, once the charges are unsealed, if this case is as strong as we would think it would be for this unprecedented step. But until then, we won't know.
Yes, and I've been looking at some details that have been put out by his lawyers as well, and all of them seem to suggest that this is all quintessential Trump's behavior, you know. In fact, we can see those visuals of Donald Trump's aircraft that is carrying Mr. Trump and his entire team of lawyers, family members. All of them are flying to New York City, where he will be turning in and appearing, and then the indictment process will begin. What does it actually mean for Trump's family? Have you managed to speak to any of them? And you know, because in particular, his daughter had made some observations that she stands with America at this point.
Well, I haven't heard of any specific reactions from them. I imagine that Donald Trump Jr., he's been out a little bit on some of in media outlets and on social media, you know, of course, saying that this is a witch hunt and a persecution. I expect that his family will support him as they did throughout his campaigns in his first term. It'll be interesting to see what role they play, particularly Ivanka and Jared, if they're going to take a more active role. I think the kind of impression was that they wouldn't be in a second campaign or a third campaign and a second term, but that remains to be seen. But I don't think that, with the exception of his niece, Mary Trump, I believe, who's very outspoken against him, I don't think we're going to see much detraction from this family during this time. In fact, if we see anything, it'll probably be defending him very ardently, like his son Donald Jr. on TV and on social media.
But interestingly, as you point that out, Ivanka's last statement, which was put out almost like 24 hours back on a white background with black text, she just wrote, "I love my father and I love my country. Today I'm pained for both. I appreciate the voices across the political spectrum expressing support and concern." How should this be read?
I think that she's basically one of the things that she's expressing is a little bit what a lot of Americans are thinking. We talked a lot about how this is partisan and how, Democrats may want this, Republicans may want that. But as an American, many Americans, this is not a happy moment because this is not a good look for us, regardless of who the former president is. And so it's a mistake to say that Americans who don't support Donald Trump are somehow, parading and celebrating in the streets. So I think that sentiment where she says, of course, she loves her father and she loves her country. And as an American, this is not like a joyous day. I think that reflects a common sentiment. But now, as far as supporting her father, I think what we should read into that is that she supported her father throughout his term and throughout his campaign. And I think if she didn't, we just wouldn't hear from her at all. So the speech doesn't really show any stark differences between the very public Ivanka that we saw during his first term.
Yes, and now that the spotlight is back on her father, there are also views that because he will be standing for the presidential elections in 2024, it will be a fresh chapter in his life and also the life of the daughter, Ivanka Trump. So are we expecting the full family to support him at this point, particularly when he turns in? How does it actually happen? I mean, in the sense that what happens now onwards, there'll be fingerprinting, there will be photograph that will be taken, his mug shots will be taken. What happens now? Kelvin.
Well, I think that the big thing that we're waiting on is many media outlets have petitioned that we'll be able to see, that there will be able to be cameras in the courtroom. New York is one of two states, New York and I believe Louisiana is the other one, that they don't really permit cameras inside the courtroom. And I think it's important because this is such an unprecedented event in the United States. I think Americans need to see it. So I think that's probably one of the biggest questions. I think that as soon as the arraignment happens, the indictment will be unsealed. I think people have made requests that it be unsealed before then. I don't know if that's going to happen, but we know that definitely tomorrow when the arraignment happens, the indictment will be unsealed and people, lay people, legal experts, all Americans will be able to see what he's being charged with and get an idea of what the evidence might be to support it. And then, of course, if everything goes as to what President Trump has said he's planning to do, he'll leave the New York courtroom as soon as he can to go back to Florida and Mar-a-Lago and give a speech that I'm sure will definitely be fraught with a mixture of campaign, speeches and grievances and whatever he's feeling at that time.
Yes, and we have seen some very sharp reactions come in from Donald Trump over the weekend. Sanjay, since you're back with us, a quick word from you, and then I bring in another guest who's joining us live on the special broadcast. Sanjay, what is Donald Trump's family strategy going to be? Because if he turns in, which he will be in the next few hours, he goes back to Florida, and then what next? What is the timeline that we are looking at?
Well, certainly the strategy of Trump, supported by his family, no doubt, will be to try and turn this around on its head, to turn this into a launch pad for his election campaign. No doubt his lawyers will be ripping through the indictment and the charges that will be presented in the court, in the courthouse in New York. They will rip that argument apart. There will be election speech writers who will be working with his team of lawyers. They will put together a speech for him to deliver at Palm Beach tomorrow at the end of this whole procedure, and that will be the launch pad for him to launch his next presidential campaign. We have seen a number of senior Republican leaders backing Trump on this. He will seek to capitalize on that and to launch himself as a credible and as the primary candidate from the Republican Party ahead of DeSantis and others who are trying to get into that race. So his attempt will be to swing this around to his advantage.
And can he really? That's a question that I will be taking to our next guest who's joining us. Spencer Critchley is a pro-democratic political commentator and author. Spencer, can he really turn it to his advantage? Because the entire world is watching America. This is certainly another very extreme test for America as a country.
Yes, I think he certainly can turn it to his advantage, and he already is, as we've seen over the past few days when Mr. Trump has raised more than $5 million in new donations based on the last report I saw. This is always the concern with an authoritarian leader like Donald Trump. It is a personality cult centered on the person of this self-styled strongman, and it's personal loyalty to this self-styled strongman. I say self-styled because I think he lacks every form of strength, most notably strength of character. But it is personal loyalty to the strongman that drives an authoritarian cult, which is what Trumpism is and what the Republican Party has evolved into. So any attack on the leader is presented as an attack on the people who support him. And if he prevails in that attack, that only emphasizes his superhuman strength. But if he fails under attack, then that just strengthens him as well, because he's presented as the eternal victim on behalf of his long-suffering followers. So it will build support and is building support amongst his followers. That won't be enough to prevail in a presidential election if he becomes the nominee, which I think is likely. But that doesn't matter with an authoritarian leader, because all they need is an intensely committed and potentially violent minority.
But Spencer, what does it do within the Republican system? Because yes, Donald Trump is, all set perhaps to contest in 2024, but he is facing challenge from within.
Yes, and unfortunately, and we cannot predict the future, which I always emphasize, the future does not exist yet, so we have no idea what's really going to happen. But just looking at the likelihood, this could be a repeat of 2016, when, because there are many Republican candidates, that creates a perfect environment for Trump, because the more sane, reasonable, and pro-democracy candidates are divided, and Trump can prevail simply by earning more support than any one of those individuals. So I think as each new candidate enters the race, it's potentially hopeful. For example, somebody like former Governor Asa Hutchinson of Arkansas, with whom I disagree on, I think, every issue, but who at least I believe is pro-democracy. In one sense, that's a hopeful sign, but on the other hand, it also increases the odds that Trump will win the nomination.
And Kelvin, coming on this, the complexities of arraigning a former president under close Secret Service protection means this is no ordinary case. Even if justice suggests Trump should be treated like any other citizen, there is intense security which is already in place in New York, given the political sensitivities of this case. And after Trump warned of potential death and destruction ahead of him being charged, what does it actually mean for Donald Trump and the entire security arrangement there?
Well, this too is an important indicator of the difference between democracy and authoritarianism. From the point of view of a rule of law-based democracy, Donald Trump's physical safety must be protected. And the potential for violence must also be prevented, because is the alternative to democracy. At the most fundamental level, the core value of democracy is that it allows us to resolve conflicts without violence. And it's when you turn to violence that democracy starts to crumble and you turn towards authoritarianism or warlordism or gangsterism or essentially a failed state. So it's in Trump's interest as an authoritarian who is anti-democracy and who obviously only cares about his own interests, to stoke fear and rage and even violence, as he showed in 2020 with the organized assault on the Capitol. So he's all about calling the district attorney an animal, evoking ancient anti-Semitic images of George Soros as a Jewish puppet master, supposedly. And as I say, stoking ultimately violence. That's essential to authoritarianism. So it's critically important for the defense of democracy that we defend the rule of law and peace within the rule of law. That includes protecting the personal security of Donald Trump, no matter how guilty he may be of anything.
Yes, and Kelvin, again, that warning that came from Donald Trump, that death and destruction perhaps will be there ahead of him being charged, especially given his past incitement before the Capitol insurrection. So far, Donald Trump's calls for protests haven't really drawn many of his supporters onto the streets. Why?
Well, that is potentially a hopeful sign.
Yes, Kelvin, go ahead.
I think there's a key difference between what's happening now, the calls now, and the calls after the 2020 election. And the difference is those people that came out in support of former President Trump, they were following his, election lie that he had really won the election, that the election had been stolen from them, things he repeated, this weekend. And they were there in hopes of changing that. They were hoping to, in some way, stand in the way of Joe Biden becoming president. The reaction was violent, but democracy prevailed. President Biden was selected and inaugurated as president. The difference between that and now, this is his supporters coming to his support based on his personal legal troubles. Okay. Now, Donald Trump has cast that as, they're only persecuting you. I just happen to be the target, them. But I think that a lot of people who might be prone to come and protest, like on January the 6th, one, they realize that they could go to jail and they see the hundreds of people that have gone to jail. But also they realize that this is for Donald Trump personally. And so I think that there will be protests, but I think that's why we haven't seen numbers of protest. And I don't think we'll see, and I hope we don't see any violence, no matter what the number is. However, we have to keep in mind the reason that our cities, particularly New York and Washington, D.C., have to be over prepared is it doesn't take a large group of people to provoke a violent act or a violent act of intimidation. So I think that the enhanced presence of law enforcement agencies is warranted and good, and I hope that we won't need to use it.
Comment on this, Spencer. There were reports that were suggesting that Trump was caught off guard by the grand jury's decision to indict him. According to a person who spoke directly with him, this is what I read in one of the papers. While he was previously bracing for an indictment, he began to believe reports that a potential charge was weeks or more, perhaps less. The indictment has clearly have an impact on the presidential race, and with leading potential challengers to Trump being, you can see those visuals of Trump's plane now finally taking off, and he's going to New York City, where he will be appearing before the grand Trump in the next few hours. This is an important moment in American history and the world history at large. Sanjay, a quick word from you, and then I bring in other panelists.
Well, this case and the way it proceeds will really depend upon the facts and the strength of the charges within that indictment that is sealed at the moment. There is a possibility, as one of our panelists suggested, that we may have the contents of it before the formal arraignment, but in any case, that arraignment process is not a long way down the line. Once we have that, and once these charges are presented in open court, once Trump is confronted with those charges, we will know what these facts are, and the case, and consequently Trump's defense will be only as strong or weak as the facts are. If the case is very strong, and this is a case that has been years in preparation, years under investigation, it has not been put together lightly or easily. This, therefore, is going to all really depend upon what facts emerge. And if those facts are very strong, then all of Trump's rhetoric and hyperbole will perhaps not be enough to cover the facts, should they be strong and overwhelming.
Yes, so what comes next for Donald Trump, the former president? Remember, had first been asked to surrender on Friday in New York, but his defense team actually asked for more time and they wanted to prepare more. As the former president's initial court appearance, it looked like that there was like that of any other defendants, but things appear very different now. So what will happen now? First appearances are usually public proceedings. If an arrest of a defendant is not needed, arrangements are made with them or their lawyers for a voluntary surrender to law enforcement. With their first appearance in court, defendants are usually booked and fingerprinted, and if a first appearance is also an arraignment, a plea is expected to be entered. Spencer, what are we likely to see then?
I imagine that the district attorney's office is going to want to manage this as non-showily as possible. In other words, the opposite of the way Mr. Trump would like to manage anything related to him. So I think that they will look for ways to avoid the public release of mugshots. For example, there are reports that they may not be intending to take any mugshots of Donald Trump, and those shots probably not even being necessary, since of course his face is so widely recognizable, that they will move him into the building through back entrances under Secret Service protection, of course, and minimize the amount. Media organizations have requested at least some presence in the courtroom. I am not up to date as to whether the judge has granted that request. Perhaps you have more recent information than I have. But I think overall, and I think quite properly, the authorities will be following the rule of law and trying to avoid any encouragement of the politicization of this. Another key feature of democracy, that we have a separation of powers by design, which separates the political function from the justice function. And if we want to defend democracy, we must do that all the way along the line and trust in the rule of law, which is so crucial to that democracy.
Yes, but Spencer, if we look at the multiple processes that could be followed, which has been put out by several legal experts, they're talking about, will he be surrendering? And because it's a voluntary surrender here, will there be a different process that will be followed henceforth?
Yes, I mean, generally speaking, with white-collar crimes where the person isn't considered to be violent and where the person is not considered to be a flight risk, although I think there is some concern about that with Donald Trump. But generally speaking, with white-collar crimes as they're known, you don't have the same kind of arrest process that you see when somebody's arrested for robbing a bank or assaulting somebody or some other sort of violent crime. So generally speaking, the defendant shows up, goes through the booking process, gets fingerprinted, usually gets their mugshot taken, seems like possibly not in this case, and then they are taken into court, where part of our democratic process, where you have a right to hear the charges made against you and then begin preparing your response to those charges. So it will actually apparently be only at that moment that we all learn, including Trump's defense team, exactly what those charges are. There's been a lot of speculation that the judge might approve the release of the charges before the arraignment, but again, the most recent news I have is that that has not happened. And that will end a lot of the speculation that's going on as to the exact nature of these charges and how robust these charges are.
Yes, because right now the entire charge is in a sealed envelope. We really do not know the content of it, and perhaps we'll know about it in the next few hours. Just hold on to your thoughts, everyone. What does this do to the race for the Republican ticket for the presidential elections? Let's listen in to Donald Trump's challenger, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis.
Now he turns around purely for political purposes and indicts a former president on misdemeanor offenses that they're straining to try to convert into felonies. That is when you know that the law has been weaponized for political purposes. That is when you know that the left is using that to target their political opponents.
Kelvin, here is DeSantis actually speaking for Donald Trump. Doesn't come as much of a surprise, though.
Well, I think that DeSantis seems to talk as if he knows what the charges are, and I don't think he does. So that's risky in that sense. Also, a lot of the rhetoric around, the left using this as a political prosecution and all of that, let's keep in mind that one of the campaign promises that Donald Trump made in 2016 very publicly was that he would have his attorney general investigate and jail Hillary Clinton. So just to put that out there that, I think he's projecting some of the things that Donald Trump has done, has threatened to do on the Democrats and the left, as he says it. Also, I think it's very interesting that a lot of Republicans are giving these full-throated defenses of Donald Trump around the issue of this being a political prosecution, being careful to not talk about the ins and outs of what the charges are actually about. And I think it says a lot about the Republican establishment now that they are coming to bat, coming to defend a former president who has multiple investigations happening about his time as president, and this particular one over hush money payments made to a porn star, which doesn't exactly reflect the values and family bringing to Florida and probably wants to bring to the rest of the country.
And Sanjay, when we look at these visuals, we did not really get a glimpse of Donald Trump when he boarded that plane. So is it likely that the entire the security service is ensuring that the former president doesn't have any media presence, or it doesn't have any picture when he makes that appearance?
Certainly they will have an interest, and they will make an effort to keep this as off camera as possible, to avoid anything that is spectacular in any sense, or for that reason therefore becomes controversial. But of course we do know that there's a serious issue here other than the facts and the details of appearance, and we know, as we were just hearing, that a lot of the Republican leaders are now putting themselves out to defend Trump, so to speak, against this kind of indictment. The apparent cover for that is that they are seeking to project a nobility of sorts, that they are standing together for the party, never mind the individual, but really they are also covering themselves, because if these charges were not to stick and if they were to criticize Trump, they would find it very hard then to face the party in their prospects ahead of the nomination for the next election. So there is clearly some maneuvering going on here, some calculations going on here that serve self-interest, not surprisingly in politics, in this kind of defense being presented for Trump. But should there be a very strong ruling against Trump, should the indictment be and the contents of that turn out to be very strong, should that then lead to a trial where Trump comes off badly, we will see this tone changing, no doubt, very rapidly.
Yes, and Spencer, are there concerns particularly that how fair is this trial, that he will not get a fair trial?
I don't think that there are serious concerns, but again, this is part of the thoroughly bad faith communications that have been coming out of the Republican Party for some time now. Liberals, meaning, I mean, by that broadly defined liberals from right to left who believe in the philosophy of liberalism, which is essentially based in reason coming out of the Enlightenment, liberals have a hard time wrapping their minds around the way an ethnic nationalist movement works. But that is what Trumpism is. That this is not a democratic movement that cares at all about factual truth or logical consistency. Ethnic nationalism, when it is taken to this extreme level, is entirely symbolic and ritualistic. It functions in the sort of 90% of our consciousness that is not rational, to use a very rough number there, meaning that it's all about the emotion of things. It's all about the way things feel. So everything is a performance. Everything is a spectacle. This is something that authoritarian leaders and fascist leaders have understood throughout history, and that Trump understands very well. Essentially, everything is a television show, and the role of mass media in authoritarianism should never be underestimated. So it doesn't matter that all of this stuff is hypocritical.
Even if it is a spectacle, we haven't really got any picture out of Donald Trump till now. How does it really suit him
we certainly
that he has not put out a picture of perhaps flash a victory sign that he is being, as he has famously said, that there is some kind of hate campaign, some kind of, efforts being made to put him down, and there is that witch hunt. Why will Donald Trump not get a picture clicked? Why is he not, appearing before media?
Oh, he certainly will. And of course, he's planning this rally apparently tomorrow evening when he returns to Mar-a-Lago. And I'm sure we'll see plenty of visuals there, if not beforehand. Trump is all about visuals, yes. Beginning with the famous descent down the Golden Escalator when he declared his campaign, yes, and used it as an opportunity to stoke terror about immigrants supposedly pouring across the border from Mexico. It's all spectacle, it's all show, and it's absolutely, classic authoritarianism. And I would say, Ron DeSantis, one of the reasons why he appears to be failing is he seems to be trying to imitate Trump without understanding how authoritarianism works. And so he does things like come out with this defense of Trump, which just makes him look weak. There's no merit to the defense, and he gains nothing there among, moderate voters and sane voters. But among the sort of Trumpist voters, he just makes himself look weak. This is the same thing that happened with Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush back in 2016. It didn't matter what they were saying and whatever the merits were of their campaign platforms. Trump just got on stage and performed as a strongman, so-called, and made them look weak, and that's essentially all that matters.
So in this spectacle, will we be seeing more Trumpism, as you have put it? Just hold on to your thoughts. There are a lot of sound bites that are coming in from Ground Zero. Trump supporters have spoken out. Let's listen in.
I'll travel around anywhere on the East Coast to see him, but he does his all for us. I'm going to give my all for him. I'm not giving up. We need him back. This economy's a joke. I went shopping last night and I broke my bank account. So it feels like the right thing to do. He's got enough supporters, but he could always use more. And it just means the world to me. It makes me feel like I'm a part of something too.
He's not the only president that has something against him. Other presidents in line have had done things and they still ran for office. So I feel that this could be a witch hunt. People trying to find things against him so he doesn't run again. And they're trying everything they could to distract him. Well, the community that I'm in, most of them are supportive of him. And I guess everybody's feeling the same way, the tension, the anxiety, the distractions and everything else. And I think we're all praying that everything works out for him, everything comes out good, so that way we could go back to normalcy.
So Kelvin Doc, here are several Americans hoping that he comes out clean, that everything goes back to normalcy, and if anything, this is witch hunt. So America seems to be fairly convinced that Donald Trump is the one who can make America great again.
No, I think what that shows is the handful of people down there in Mar-a-Lago who support him believe that. I don't believe that is anywhere close to majority of Americans. I actually don't even believe it's anywhere close to majority of Republicans. But he does have, I would say, around 30% of the Republican Party that do feel the support and reflect the what you just played with those Trump supporters. But I think in general, Republicans and Democrats, that isn't reflective of what America thinks or America wants. Because let's keep in mind, even the people who support his idea and his way of being president want to win. Republicans have lost the popular vote of the last 7 of the last 8 elections. And so you have a lot of Republicans that realize they want to win, and they can't do that with Donald Trump, regardless of how much they may like or support what he did or how he did it. So we have to keep some of the protesters around Mar-a-Lago and even maybe some in New York, take it with a grain of salt, because they're not representative of most Americans.
Okay, but Kelvin, what made Donald Trump's team ask for more time? He was expected to appear on Friday, but they asked for more time and then it moved to Tuesday.
My guess would be that this is because of the security arrangement, because coordinating things with Secret Service, obviously the city of New York, they had a lot to prepare. So I didn't necessarily read into anything like that they're worried or that there's something that they're trying to work out, other than this is an unprecedented situation. The indictment came out at a time when I don't even think Trump's own team was expecting it. And if you think about it, all of the things that are involved in transporting, arranging the appearance and then arranging the exit on Thursday, and they're doing about Tuesday over a weekend, that's a very short amount of time.
And Spencer, first appearance are usually public proceedings. And if an arrest of a defendant is not needed, arrangements are made with them or their lawyers for a voluntary surrender to law enforcement. With their first appearance in court, defendants are usually booked and fingerprinted. Will that happen all on camera? And what exactly is the rule and law that is followed in New York State?
Well, I'm not an expert on the law, and however, from what I do understand, they're going to minimize the public aspects of this process, for example, by quite possibly skipping the taking of mugshots, which are not necessary for such a recognizable person, and the fingerprinting would not normally be conducted in public, I wouldn't think. Many defendants in a case like this might be required to wear handcuffs. I doubt very much that that's going to happen in this case. So I think this is an example of the authorities wanting to passionately as possible and be seen to be doing that as an important part of this process.
But this is a unique situation in the sense that never before a sitting president or a former president has gone through an indictment process of this nature. So will he be treated like any other citizen of America, or will there be some exceptions here?
There are unavoidably some exceptions. In principle, a president or former president, yes, should be treated the same as any other citizen. This is a fundamental concept in the United States, that even the person who occupies the highest position in the land is a citizen of the United States and a servant of the Constitution. And this is one of the wonderful things about the design of American democracy. And the reality of that dates back to our first president, George Washington, who had the opportunity to, in effect, become a king. He was so almost universally revered, not just popular, but revered, and declined that opportunity and retired to his farm, as they compared him to the Roman general Cincinnatus at the time. Now in that sense, yes, the president or former president must be treated exactly the same as any other American citizen. However, that's not really possible for another very good reason. There must be some modifications to that principle in practice because of the separation of powers. It's crucially important that it is only done with the greatest reluctance that we bring charges against a political figure, especially at the top of the government, because if you do start to do what the Republicans are falsely describing as weaponization of the legal system, you are gravely undermining democracy. If you use trumped up charges, if you'll forgive the pun, to go after political enemies, which is, I think Kevin pointed out, is exactly what Donald Trump was doing during his presidency when he had what he thought was control over the Justice Department. If you do that, you are eating away at the core of democracy. So while he must be treated the same as any other citizen before the law, I think we quite rightly have to be very slow to bring charges, including the charges that he's facing now in this first of what I think will be a series of indictments.
And Kevin, Donald Trump spent his weekend playing golf. What about Joe Biden? How concerned is he about the political fallout and ramifications of this indictment?
I think the way Biden and the White House are responding is exactly the way they should, and that's staying out of it. I think Biden is focusing on obviously what he's doing as president. I'm sure that he's probably considered what this means for the 2024 election if he decides to be in it. But he's made very clear, and I think they've done a very good job of staying out of it. One, because it's not his role. This is a state prosecution. He has nothing to do with it. And pontificating on what he may think about it or whatever gives the impression of it being politicized. So I think President Biden is doing exactly what he should be doing, and that's staying out of it.
And what has been the role of Bragg in particular? Because he is someone who has been repeatedly targeted by Trump, Kevin? Just for a recap of our viewers, the role of Attorney Bragg.
Yeah, I think it's very unfortunate that we have this intimidation campaign against the elected district attorney, Alvin Bragg, with many racial overtones from former President Trump and some of his supporters. I think that what we should all keep in mind is that most Americans don't want someone to be prosecuted because of their politics. They also don't want someone to not be prosecuted when they should be because of their politics. And when you look at things like the leadership in the House of Representatives, Republicans, before an indictment was even voted on, threatening the Manhattan DA with, a hearing before Congress and wanting documents and to speak with people on his team for an ongoing investigation that hadn't even resulted in an indictment is purely a campaign of intimidation and interference. I'm glad, though, that it doesn't appear to have affected the district attorney Bragg, but we have to stop that because it's not an attack against him, it's an attack against our system. So we have to be very careful about that.
And Spencer, Donald Trump faces multiple cases, including what happened at the Capitol. But he is being indicted in a case of hush money paid to adult film actor Stormy Daniels in 2016. Does it make his case worse because of the moral, nature of an argument which is often put forth?
Not to his supporters, again, because the loyalty to him as a person is the whole point. It's this sort of cult-like, non-rational loyalty, which really is more a characteristic of medieval times than the modern age. So it really doesn't matter what he's accused of. His innocence is infinite, and the guilt of his opponents is equally infinite. There's a Yale professor of history who has named Timothy Snyder, who's excellent on this subject in his book, The Road to Unfreedom, in helping people understand this mindset within the context of Russia. It's very similar here. So the moral charges associated with the moral issues associated with this first indictment and Stormy Daniels, you would think would be deal breakers, for example, with the evangelical Christians, many of whom are so fervent in their support for Trump. But these things can always be explained away. For example, evangelical Christians will cite what's known as the broken vessel concept, in which an imperfect vessel can be the vessel of God's will, and they'll point to David in the Bible. as an example of this. Anything can be explained away because, as you heard in one of your clips, the loyalty among his most committed supporters is personal and it's mystical. As you heard people using this messianic language, which is also typical, as if he is their Messiah, literally identifying this lifelong con artist who has cheated on each wife with the next wife, and each of them with multiple girlfriends, apparently. And they're identifying him essentially with Jesus Christ. This is essentially mystical, and nothing will shake commitment like that. I think Kevin is right that this is a minority of Americans. Unfortunately, he remains the leader of the Republican Party, one of our two major political parties in this country, and enjoys overwhelming support within that party, not necessarily the cult-like support that we see in his most fervent followers, but in my view, any support for Donald Trump is not just a political failure, it's long since become a moral failure, assuming one believes in democracy.
Yes, and it's a dramatic and divisive chapter, certainly in American history. In perhaps the next couple of minutes, we'll see Donald Trump's aircraft land in New York. Sanjay, a quick update from you.
Well, yes, this is really now building up to the moment we've been waiting for. We know that Trump is almost in New York already. We know that there's a sealed envelope sitting in a courthouse. We are all guessing around the contents of it. We've been speaking about Stormy Daniels and issues of morality and the extent to which they overlap with legality. Inevitably and fundamentally, they always do and must. But in this case, the issue of Stormy Daniels is not the moral issue about primarily about the allegations of sexual relations outside of marriage. It is about the process of the funding and whether whether the financial disclosures were accurate, which of course begs the question that if they were inaccurate, under what head you would put such expenses. But really the question is about a financial misdemeanor here, and particularly in the context of an imminent election. That is the legal issue, and that is the therefore moral issue before the court, whether that law was violated, whether there have been legal violations in relation to accounting and financial reporting. So if the indictment is along these lines, and we don't know for certain absolutely that it is, but if it is along these lines as widely expected, then it is that legal issue that will be decisive.
And Kevin, what really explains that the federal investigation into this matter was closed in 2019, which made many perhaps believe that the weight of investigation or evidence may not be as compelling at that time?
Well, I think there are two factors. One is, we have to remember that was the Justice Department under President Trump at the time. And probably more importantly is that they were under a directive to not charge a sitting president. Now, there may have been, disagreements among the prosecutors about whether it was a strong case or not. But I think those two facts, that they weren't going to indict a sitting president and that this was Trump's Justice Department, gives you an idea of why maybe this wasn't pursued at the federal level when Trump was president.
And before I let you go, because I know you'll be heading to another broadcast perhaps, just help us understand, Kevin, do you see this some kind of potential self-goal by the Democrats?
I think that most Democrats, particularly Democrats in power, are seeing this the way that they should, that this is a private citizen who is being indicted. And he also happens to be the front runner for the opposing party's nomination. But as far as Democrats are concerned, they're going to continue, supporting who the nominee is, possibly President Biden if he decides to run, because Democrats cannot let Republicans' narrative that they're behind this and this is an arm and a weapon that they're using to politicize the 2024 campaign. Just because the Republicans say it doesn't make it so. And I think that Democrats just need to focus on that and do as they're doing.
Yes, and gloves are off. We are already clearly in the election season. Kevin Dark, Democratic strategist, joining me from Washington, D.C. Appreciate your time. Spencer, continue to stay with us because there are a lot of developments that are taking place in New York City as Donald Trump will arrive there, and all eyes are on the impact the case will have on the 2024 presidential elections. Following the arraignment, Trump will head to Florida to address his followers, and this is a special report.
The office of former U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll speak in Florida on Tuesday following his arraignment in New York City. Trump is expected to be fingerprinted and photographed in a Manhattan courthouse as he becomes the first former president to face criminal charges. He's set to fly from Palm Beach to New York Monday, where he will spend the night at Trump Tower before his court appearance the next day. On Sunday, Trump asked for contributions to his 2024 re-election campaign in a video post to Truth Social, his self-founded social media platform.
If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, it would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it.
Trump was arraigned in New York after an indictment by grand jury that heard evidence on hush money paid to porn star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. Trump describes the probe as a political witch hunt. Some of his top supporters, including Republican lawmaker Marjorie Taylor Greene, say they will go to New York on Tuesday to protest. Officials at the Manhattan courthouse said they will shut down some courtrooms ahead of Trump's expected appearance. Trump lawyer Joe Tacopina told ABC on Sunday he plans to move to dismiss the charges. But he stopped short of doubling down on Trump's claim that the judge in the case, Justice Juan Merchan, is biased. Merchan also presided over a criminal trial last year in which Trump's real estate company was convicted of tax fraud, though Trump himself was not charged. Trump's office said he will fly from his arraignment back to Palm Beach Tuesday evening, where he will speak from his Mar-a-Lago estate.
We have Stephen Golub, international affairs expert, joining us on this special broadcast. Before I bring in Spencer, a quick word from you, Stephen. How are you looking at the developments today? The entire world is watching the arrival of Donald Trump in New York City.
Yes, there certainly are big developments. To try to put this in context, even though this is so important today, with other potential and even bigger indictments coming down the line, it could be that a month or 2 or 3 months from now, we'll view this as still important, but not as important as the indictments that may be coming regarding the insurrection on January 6th, regarding electoral interference. And of course, we'll see also how big a demonstration occurs today, if there is a huge demonstration, which from what I'm seeing and reading may not be the case, but we'll find out.
But why? Stephen, why? Why? Despite all the calls of protests, why is it that Republicans, average Republicans, haven't really hit the street? Are they not convinced with the point being made by Donald Trump here that this is witch hunt?
It's a good, there's a good question about why this is going on. The Donald Trump has almost a cult-like array of support, which I believe a previous guest was referring to. Whether they're mobilized for today or not is another matter. It doesn't seem like there's been the online buzz or the offline contacts to try to generate the big crowd or the very, very even violent crowd that we had January 6, 2021. It remains to be seen what will happen today, though.
Okay, it remains to be seen what happens today. We have Ray Locker also joining me from Washington, D.C. Ray, a quick word from you. What are you waiting? What will you be watching out today for?
Well, I'll be looking for any signs of protest or violence, which I don't expect. I mean, you talk about lack of crowds. Remember when President Trump was inaugurated in 2017, he didn't have much of a crowd then either. So other than January 6, 2021, he really hasn't generated the crowds that a lot of people expect sometimes, certainly given the noise he makes on social media.
So Spencer, if there's no spectacle, then how will Donald Trump continue to build his defense? The classic Trumpism and which is characteristically his defense has been about accusations and about how the Americans, particularly the Republicans, are standing with him. If they do not hit the streets, then what will it mean for him?
There will always be a fictional explanation for any event. If huge crowds showed up, that would suit the ongoing generation of this fiction. And if no crowds show up, that will suit the fiction. Again, because facts and logic are not only irrelevant to an authoritarian ethnic nationalist, they actually seek to destroy the very concept and replace it with fiction. So Trump will find a way to spin this into his ongoing narrative of grievance, himself as the champion of the aggrieved people, rescuing, his fantasy version of great America against all these evil forces that are apparently supposedly arrayed against it. Now, at a certain point, if a leader continues to fail to draw visible support, if Trump's crowds continue to shrink as they have been for some time, and if his preferred candidates continue to lose as they did in the most recent elections in the fall of 2020, at a certain point, people notice the emperor has no clothes. And the same fervent devotion that was attached to the leader can instantly turn against him if it turns out that the people who have been following him feel like they've suddenly discovered after all of this, they finally discover that he's a fraud or that he's betrayed them in some way. So again, if you look at the fate of authoritarian leaders throughout history, think of Mussolini, for example, being, killed and his corpse dragged through the streets of Rome and suspended on high. This was cheered by the same people who were his most fervent followers beforehand. Or if you look at the liberation of Paris after the German occupation, people who had been active collaborators with the Nazis were suddenly presenting themselves as members of the resistance. So that is the probable fate at some point for Donald Trump, but it won't be because of any kind of legal defense or winning any kind of rational argument. It will happen as a matter of symbolism and ritual when suddenly his magical power seems to evaporate from his body.
So, Stephen, is that moment now for Donald Trump? If people are not hitting the streets, and if they're not his supporters, although maybe limited in certain pockets, but when it is about that moment in Manhattan court, if they do not hit the streets and stand there supporting him, then what does it mean for him?
Well, don't just assess Donald Trump's success or failure in terms of people in the streets, although I do think Spencer made very good points about Trump's authoritarian inclinations and tactics. If he still is doing well in the polls, if the Republican leaders and even his opponents are reading those polls and continuing to back him in view of this, this upcoming trial and the other ones that may well come down the line with his being indicted in the next few months, then he can still maintain a hold over the party. And it is telling, as I indicated, that the response to this initial indictment by the New York City District Attorney has been to rally around the flag, so to speak, that is Donald Trump, on the part of almost all Republican leaders, even including his leading opponent, DeSantis. So he's actually using the indictment, or the indictment is being manipulated by him in a way that favors him politically, at least for the moment.
And Ray, are you expecting some some Republicans perhaps to rally to defend Donald Trump? What we saw when all of them, in fact, went ahead and attacked Bragg on Twitter and accused the district attorney of a political witch hunt. Will they be present in the court?
No, they're not going to be present. No, they're not going to show up in the court and protest. I mean, they're going to be a zillion miles away from that. The fact is, these guys don't have any use for Donald Trump. They're afraid of his supporters. We've seen that in the Dominion libel case in Delaware and all the files from Fox News. They can't stand Donald Trump. I mean, Tucker Carlson said he wished he would go away. He's sick of him, but they're afraid to say so publicly. So they'll make some utterances on TV or on social media, but when it comes to actually showing up and doing something, they won't be there because really they know that he's a loser. He didn't win the popular vote in 2016. They lost the House in 2018. They lost the presidency again in the popular vote, and this time in the electoral vote in 2020. And they did badly in the midterms. They know that he's an albatross, but he has a strong base. So they're doing this dance, trying to satisfy the base while distancing themselves. And we'll see how well they do it. But they're not going to be anywhere near that courtroom tomorrow.
So they'll not be near the courtroom tomorrow. Who will be with him then?
A very small group of people. I mean, he's down to like the 5th tier of defense lawyers he can find. I mean, it looks like he's getting the extras from the movie Goodfellas. I mean, he's running out of people because, first of all, he's long known for not paying his legal bills, and his case is not so great. Now, maybe, and we don't also know what Bragg's case is. There could be 24 counts in this indictment that we'll find out tomorrow. And that's when we'll really know whether he was fishing.
But Ray, he's one of the richest Americans. Why is he known for not paying the legal fee? Paying his lawyers, why?
First of all, he's not as rich as he says. That's all an illusion. He's built his career on not paying vendors. I mean, he had like 3,000 lawsuits by 2016 in which he had stiffed people. He doesn't pay. I mean, has the world not been paying attention? The guy doesn't do anything he says he's going to do.
Okay, so he has not paid his legal team. And then who will really defend him? Stephen.
Well, I think Ray made some very good points about Trump being a grifter, including when it comes to not paying his lawyers. Still, lawyers may be attracted to him because they gets their name in the papers, which may be satisfying to them in and of itself, but it could generate further business down the line. And also, I'd caution that even though Trump has a bad reputation, even though his support in terms of people in the streets might be fading, I'm not sure about that, but might be, we've counted Donald Trump out before. In many times during his career, including the 2016 election, including right after the insurrection when it seemed like he might really be impeached. So we shouldn't underestimate him. I hate saying that because I do think he's an authoritarian and a demagogue, but he's managed to rally support before. The Republican leadership, even though they're not accompanying him to the courthouse, still is kowtowing to him for the most part. So regardless of what happens with this case, Donald Trump may still be very politically viable. He may be under trial in the middle of the campaign next year and still be the leading candidate or the nominee.
And so let's try and decode his team of lawyers. Are these people, Spencer, who have been associated with him for several years, or is this a new team that he has set up?
Trump is constantly cycling through lawyers for exactly this reason, that he ends up stiffing them. And I agree, he's constantly forced to go farther down the hierarchy to find, ultimately bottom feeders who'll be willing to work with him. And this, too, is absolutely characteristic of authoritarians. An authoritarian leader ends up conducting a jobs program for the most mediocre and dishonest people in society. We see this all the time, and this is both a strength and eventually the weakness of authoritarianism. We saw this in the Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, fascist Italy. It happens again and again. If you are not very good at your job, but you're willing to swear absolute loyalty to the authoritarian, and or if you are a person of terrible character but are willing to swear loyalty, then there's you think anyway, there's a job for you. And even if you don't get paid, at least you might finally have a chance at some kind of prominence that you might be able to leverage into your personal advantage in the future. Now, this is the weakness, because if you build an organization with the worst people you can find, that organization is going to be pretty unstable. Furthermore, those people are going to betray you at the first opportunity that appears to be in their advantage. There's an old saying from the American South: if they'll do it with you, they'll do it to you. Meaning, if they'll conspire with you to commit crimes, they'll conspire against you to commit crimes, because you have drawn people to you who are terrible people and who are only interested in their own momentary advantage.
But you cannot really write off Donald Trump, as Stephen is pointing out rightly. Ray Locker, how are you looking at this entire misdemeanor? And when you look at the spectacle, what do you see will be unfolding in the next few hours?
Well, he's going to milk the spectacle for everything he can. It depends on whether any of this is televised in the courtroom. He'll probably play up to that. His event in Florida tomorrow night is sure to be a spectacle. I mean, there's going to be lie after lie coming fast and furious, and fact checkers are going to be working overtime. I mean, if you've seen any of his recent appearances, they're so far beyond anything that's normal. It's amazing. So I expect more of the same. And I mean, he got elected president. That in and of itself is a miracle. So yeah, you can't count him out. The fact that he's still walking around free is a miracle, but I think time is running out for him. I mean, this is not the only indictment he's going to face. The Georgia one is coming. There's a special federal prosecutor working on the documents case. I mean, this is just warming up. The big time concert is coming.
So, Stephen, things are getting tough for Donald Trump, but certainly he's known to be a man who can spring a surprise. And the entire Republican Party, as far as optics is concerned, they're standing with him.
Yes, certainly. And let's keep in mind that this trial is not going to take place in the next month or 2 months or 4 months, most likely. One thing Donald Trump is good at, and even I agree about the quality of his lawyers, but one thing that they may be good at is delaying. That's what a big part of his legal strategy is, to delay, maybe even until next year for the trial. Certainly, if these other indictments come down against him before in a month or 2 or 3, he may be able to delay them into next year, which means that in a sense, even though all sorts of things can happen between now and a year from now, there's a good chance that he won't be convicted by then, or even if he's convicted, he won't be sentenced for another few months. So a big part of both his legal and political strategy is to keep things bubbling, to delay, so that it won't be as clear to his potential supporters, or even more importantly, people in the middle of the political spectrum, that he's done, that he's defeated, that he's been convicted. So in terms of what he's doing in court, whether it be today, not today, but in the weeks and months to come.
Yes, but Stephen, look at the entire, hypocrisy in this entire argument that we are looking at. On one hand, we know that Republicans are those who have strong religious and spiritual connections. They are supposed to be morally strong, and then they continue to have faith in someone who is being indicted in what is a hush money case in trying to pay to a porn star, Stormy Daniels.
That's a great question. I think at least part of the answer is that they believe in the policies he's producing, even though they don't believe in him as a person. And a great example of that, unfortunately, a great example of that is look at abortion. He appointed Supreme Court justices, and he's backed as a man in his rhetoric and in his policies banning abortion. Now, even though he's a thief, he had this affair with a porn star. He had that affair, or he allegedly had that affair, while his wife had just had a child and was his child and was at home. Even though they may not like him, the evangelicals and the like may not like him for his personal conduct, they see him as pursuing their political agenda. And evangelicals in the U.S. are not just about religion, they're also about politics and certain political matters starting with, most prominently, abortion.
So, Spencer, when you look at this entire popular culture image that is associated with Donald Trump, his brash attitude, trying to play the victim mostly when he is extremely powerful and influential, would you say that the sentence or the charges or the count on which he will be charged will become important as to how America will be viewing him, or remain, perhaps untouched?
Yes, I think for the majority of Americans, it's not a large enough majority, in my view, but it is a majority. It will continue to diminish his already terrible reputation. But as I say, with an ethnic nationalist authoritarian, a demagogue to use another term for it, anything that's seen as an attack on him just reinforces this combined sense of, it's a mystical sense of eternal victimhood and eternal victory. Both of these are merged in the same authoritarian leader. And the evocations, again, of a Messiah are not coincidental. The Jesus as a symbolic figure in the Christian tradition was both the Son of God and the sacrificial Lamb of God. And so this really does function symbolically on that ritualistic level. The same with the abortion issue just mentioned, by the way. There are, of course, people who have a sincere moral or religious or both objection to abortion, and they are, of course, entitled to have that view. But abortion only emerged as such an intense issue relatively recently in the United States, and that was a deliberate policy of the Republican Party to fire up a fervently committed base. Again, understanding the symbolism involved. So people who used to perhaps oppose abortion but were not as intensely and potentially violently opposed to abortion as you see now, got spun up more and more intensely by symbolic images of one of the worst crimes you could imagine, which is the supposed murder of an innocent young child. Again, the evocations of the sacrifice of the Lamb of God, of the innocent children, are not coincidental. And so, as so often happens with authoritarian movement, the claim of infinite innocence is used to justify evil. And that is exactly what somebody like Trump is doing. He's deliberately exploiting the sincere and fervent opposition to abortion amongst many of his followers, many of them more intensely opposed to it than they would have been otherwise. He's deliberately exploiting that for his own self-interest. Again, just another way in which this is not a contest as the Republicans want to present it between Democrats and Republicans or the left and right within a functioning democracy. This is a struggle between democracy on the left and the right and authoritarianism. That is literally what's at stake here.
Okay, just hold on to your thoughts, everyone. I'm going to play that last soundbite, and perhaps the only soundbite that Donald Trump has given in the last 24 hours, in which he says that America is becoming a third world nation. Let's listen in, and then I go back to the panelists.
We are now officially a third world country. No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks. But they only attack me because I fight for you. It's very simple. They can't buy me and they can't control me, and that scares them beyond belief. Since the very beginning, I've shunned the globalist special interest donors who have made a fortune off of destroying our country. Instead, our presidential campaign has always been funded by grassroots patriots like you. Your contribution today will show the left that nothing can destroy the greatest political movement in history. This is the greatest movement in political history. There's never been anything like it. Even the fake news media, when they hear me say that, they can't challenge it because it's true. And you think about what we did in 2016, and then we did even better by many millions and millions of votes in 2020, but the election was rigged and stolen. But now we're going to take back our country in 2024. If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, it would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it, because they're going to have billions of dollars fighting to make this a communist country, and that's what they're doing. They skipped socialism. The train didn't stop at that station. In just a couple of years, our country is going to be richer, stronger, and greater than ever before. But that's only if we win in 2024. Otherwise, our country will continue to fail. Our country will be a disaster.
Because I'm fighting for you, that is the reason why I am perhaps the first American president to face indictment. An expected response coming in from Donald Trump. Ray Locker, let's discuss the judiciary and the entire American, the legal system, which is now being questioned, and the direct attack that is coming in from Donald Trump. Explain to us what was the process that was followed that led to this indictment. And it happened in 2019.
Well, I mean, you had a case in which Trump allegedly paid off Stormy Daniels, the porn star, with money that was funneled through Michael Cohen, his lawyer. The question is whether he did illegal things to make that money available. I don't know all the legal aspects of that. He was indicted by a grand jury sitting in Manhattan, one of the boroughs of the city of New York. There are grand juries held in local jurisdictions all around the country, just like there's one in Atlanta that listened to vote fraud allegations there. So that's what happens. It's not controlled by the federal government. It's a local decision. Sometimes, individual prosecutors and grand juries can go off the rails. I mean, the longtime saying is a grand jury will indict a ham sandwich. They usually do what the prosecutors want, but not always. So that's the process here. This is done by a local prosecutor and grand jury, and in a place that's not really conducive to Trump. I mean, there are Trump supporters in New York, but Manhattan is primarily a very liberal Democratic area, and that's the way it works out. And so they brought this indictment. They have to follow the law. And most prosecutors, particularly, in New York, are reluctant to go after a prominent defendant like a former president because they don't want to lose. So they probably feel fairly confident in the evidence they have. But once you get into a courtroom and you get before 12 jurors, anything can happen. You don't know what's in those jurors' minds or in their hearts. And all it takes is one person to keep him from getting convicted. So that's how it works.
But Stephen, we are looking at a sealed envelope. We really do not know the nature and what is the term of this indictment. We do not know. We do not have several details. So what is the maximum term or maximum sentence that he can actually get?
I don't know. I think that depends on what's all in the indictment. I mean, if they tack on a bunch of charges, it could be a lot of time. I don't think anybody expects him to go to jail. So we'll know more tomorrow when the indictment is unsealed.
Okay, Stephen, what are your thoughts?
I basically agree. What's been bandied about in the press is that based on our very limited understanding of what actually might be presented, we haven't seen the indictment, much less the evidence yet. 4 years is what's been discussed. But again, as I believe it was Ray said, until we see the indictment, we don't know for sure. One added point I'd make regarding this, though, is that even though Donald Trump is the former president, bringing this kind of case is not that unusual. Dozens of people in recent years have been tried and convicted in New York City for the kinds of crimes Donald Trump has committed. Now, none of them involve trying to, illegal campaign donations regarding a presidential election and in effect perhaps affecting that election. But there are analogous cases that make it clear that even though the case is unique in some ways, the same kind of crimes or the same kind of prosecution has taken place dozens of times recently. As for whether he'll go to jail, I agree, even if he's convicted as a white-collar criminal, maybe taking the political considerations into account, it's unlikely he would serve time, even if convicted.
So if he doesn't serve time, Spencer, I can see a new panelist joining us as well. Thank you so much and welcome to the special broadcast. Amy, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes. Spencer, so what does it actually mean in the sense that we are continuing to have this discussion even as Donald Trump's aircraft will be landing in New York and he will be heading to Manhattan. There is no serving of the sentence, then Donald Trump, of course, can contest. He'll continue to paint himself as a victim of a legal system which has been weaponized. He'll continue to say that Joe Biden and his team are scared because he believes in America being great again. So that cult of Donald Trump really doesn't take a hit.
No, I think that's true no matter what happens. As I say, everything just gets incorporated into the ongoing fiction, this operatic narrative of the authoritarian leader as both the eternal victim and the eternal victor. So no, you know, if he were to be sent to jail, that would be seen as crime directed against him personally. In no way would he present it as, well, I guess I lost, you know, in a just legal process, and there's no way his fervent supporters would see it that way. And if he doesn't go to jail, then he'll claim he was completely vindicated, as he claimed after the Mueller report. You know, the Mueller report, which was stifled, in my view, by then Attorney General William Barr, who in my view represents a particular species of bureaucratic evil that does all kinds of damage in all kinds of countries around the world. It's very mild, it's very polite, it's very well behaved, and yet it's extremely dangerous. And you know, the Mueller report actually presented alarming evidence of connections between Trump and Russia, connections which have become all the clearer over time. And it says virtual slam dunk cases of obstruction of justice in the Mueller report, and yet Trump, of course, claims that he was 100% vindicated, but it wouldn't matter if it had come out and recommended criminal charges against him. That would fit into this narrative as well. The clip you played, that long clip of, and you know, making claims about the so-called disaster under the Biden presidency. Of course, if you engage with any of those claims factually and logically, they are the opposite of the truth. But once again, it's almost as if this is an instructional video for how to be an authoritarian. It's not just that he's lying, it's that he's staging direct, fantastical assaults on the truth, because the only truth you're ever supposed to believe is the fictional one that he creates from one moment to the next.
We are now officially a third world country. No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks. But they only attack me because I fight for you. It's very simple. They can't buy me and they can't control me, and that scares them beyond belief. Since the very beginning, I've shunned the globalist special interest donors who have made a fortune off of destroying our country. Instead, our presidential campaign has always been funded by grassroots patriots like you. Your contribution today will show the left that nothing can destroy the greatest political movement in history. This is the greatest movement in political history. There's never been anything like it. Even the fake news media, when they hear me say that, they can't challenge it because it's true. And you think about what we did in 2016, and then we did even better by many millions and millions of votes in 2020, but the election was rigged and stolen. But now we're going to take back our country in 2024. If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, It would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it, because they're going to have billions of dollars fighting to make this a communist country, and that's what they're doing. They skipped socialism. The train didn't stop at that station. In just a couple of years, our country is going to be richer, stronger, and greater than ever before. But that's only if we win in 2024. Otherwise, our country will continue to fail. Our country will be a disaster.
I have Amy Tarkanian. She's a Republic strategist and former Nevada GOP chairwoman. Amy, appreciate your time. News just coming in, Amy. And this is as per the letter to Judge Joan Merchant. Trump's team has argued that the cameras in the courtroom should be denied because it will create a circus-like atmosphere at the arraignment, raise unique security concerns, and is inconsistent with President Trump's presumption of innocence. Why? We believed we were all expecting some kind of spectacle. That's what Donald Trump wanted.
Right. No, it's quite surprising. And in that clip that you just showed, there was only two parts of that I would actually agree with on President Trump. Is one, that he actually did very well in the 2016 election, and two, that President Biden is doing a terrible job. Everything else is tapping into the citizens' emotions, trying to drag people into his circus, into his chaos, and basically capitalizing off of what's going on by asking for people to donate whatever they can to the cause and making them feel like they are part of something bigger, when he is manipulating and lying to an extent in a number of areas. I think that it would actually be beneficial if he had cameras in the courtroom, because then everyone could see for themselves and hear for themselves on exactly what is going on, instead of just having to learn it through members of the media. And then maybe his followers would have a better understanding of what exactly is taking place and why it could be serious.
So, Stephen, why is Donald Trump not agreeing to cameras? Because he says that there'll be circus-like atmosphere. He's someone who believes to be playing the ringmaster.
Right. No, that's
very... Why? Oh, asking me?
Yes, Stephen.
Yeah, I agree with much of Amy's analysis. I disagree with what she said about President Biden, but I think there is a logic, a method to his madness, if you want, in that in the court, Donald Trump won't be in charge. He may not be able to say anything or to say much at all. He won't be the commanding presence that he tries to be through the spectacles he creates in public, or through social media. So it may be a smart strategy on the part of him and his lawyers to just rule out cameras because they show him in another light, even perhaps bordering on weakness, as opposed to what he tries to constantly emphasize, his supposed strength.
So, Stephen, here is Donald Trump not giving... Yes, please, go ahead. Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
If there happens to be any photographs that are taken, whether if it be a mugshot or him, if they possibly handcuff him, which, they're saying that's most likely not going to take place. But, he very well may have that opportunity if there were cameras in there. I would agree with the gentleman that he will not be in control, but he's really, really excellent at throwing out those one-liners and those zingers. And I think that would actually benefit him. But if there is a mugshot that is somehow leaked, because in New York City, it's not well known, or it's not actually normalized to have the mugshots released. But if it's leaked out, you can guarantee that will be on every campaign poster, every campaign t-shirt, mug, pen, and that will actually benefit him.
So might as well have a spectacle, a controlled spectacle, because if he wishes to speak to the media, Stephen, here is Donald Trump perhaps sending a message. He doesn't get a picture clicked while boarding the plane. We don't know who all are there in that aircraft with him. We do not know who all would be accompanying him, be it Ivanka or Melania, any of his family members who are going to be present with him inside the courtroom. And then he perhaps only wants to speak in Florida tomorrow. Before that, he would hold on to his thoughts because he doesn't really know what is in that sealed envelope.
Well, I think the spectacle won't be in the court because, as we discussed, he won't be in control. And he is just as importantly, he has plenty of opportunities for spectacle otherwise, whether it's on the courthouse steps, whether it's in this press conference in Florida, whether it's in campaign rallies or TV appearances in the weeks or months to come. Donald Trump will not be short on opportunities to create spectacle. I'd go a step further in terms of what we've just discussed, however. It wouldn't surprise me at all if Donald Trump and his defense team banned cameras from even his trial. Unlike many jurisdictions in New York State, or at least New York City, the defense has the prerogative of saying we don't want our trial to be televised or to be recorded for television. In many other states or jurisdictions, it has to be agreed to by the prosecutor. I believe it's the prerogative of the defense here. So for the reasons I just stated, his opportunities to have spectacle outside the court, his lack of control and lack of ability to shout, to attack, to throw off one-liners, as Amy mentioned, in court, it wouldn't surprise me at all if he doesn't want cameras and is able to, in effect, bar cameras from his trial.
Then, Spencer, how does this political persecution narrative get built? Seeing Trump perhaps handcuffed would have been an image that he would have distributed among his supporters. And we heard a number of them, all of them saying that this is a case of witch hunt.
Yeah, he would if he had the ability to dictate exactly what happened. And I think a very, very important theme is being raised here in these comments. And that is the role of media and spectacle in authoritarianism. One of the roots of German nationalism, which then became malignant in the form of fascism in the 20th century, was the Gesamtkunstwerk, as it was called, the total work of art, pioneered by Richard Wagner, the opera composer who invented much of the nationalist German mythology that the Nazis appropriated. And with the arrival of mass media, it moved from opera to radio and then film and television. And Lenin, another totalitarian leader, understood Italian leader rules by using mass media. So after the Bolshevik Revolution, made sure that there were cheap radios everywhere across the new Soviet Union so that citizens were never out of the reach of the propaganda being issued from Moscow. This is something that authoritarians who in their dreams become totalitarians have known ever since the rise of mass media, that it's essentially a Hollywood spectacle. Trump himself, the whole image of him as a successful tycoon is a complete media fabrication from the show The Apprentice, in which he starred for all those years. He was a serial failure who was billions of dollars in debt at one point. He went bankrupt multiple times and was ultimately bailed out by Russian oligarchs and gangsters, buying condos in his buildings and buying houses from him at extremely inflated prices, often when they would never take occupancy. So this image of him in the boardroom as, you know, as the tycoon overseeing the Apprentice, it was a Hollywood set that had nothing to do with the reality. And that continues to this day. The problem with him appearing in the courtroom with cameras is he can't control the lighting and sound, and lighting and sound is the essence of spectacle. This is a man, after all, who walks around all day long wearing heavy television makeup. That's why he is apparently orange, is he overdoes it with the TV makeup that, you know, just about everybody who appears on TV has to wear, because you need to do it to compensate for lighting. But he does it when he's just walking around. Similarly, the incredible feat of architecture that is his hair is a total, you know, it's a fictional hairstyle essentially, and it's a total creation for the cameras. In many ways, Trump, I'm sorry to say, is a perfect expression of this moment in American cultural history. He's a completely fictional character whose power is completely dependent on the mass media and spectacle. He's the quintessential hollow man, to borrow from T.S. Eliot, but taken to the most extreme degree. I can only hope that this represents a crisis point in history, and that he represents both the worst of us, but the last, one must hope, of this particular tendency, and that we could reclaim a democracy where we have conservatives and liberals from the far right to the far left, as long as they believe in democracy, simply continuing the ongoing debate of a legitimate democracy instead of, as I say, this assault of authoritarianism against democracy.
Spencer, if he is a media creation, then why do Americans, particularly the Republicans, still have faith in him?
Well, it is a matter of faith, and that's something that liberals, whether you define that as people who believe in the philosophy of liberalism or liberals of the left, which is the common usage in the United States, liberals tend to be rationalist. Liberals of both kinds tend to be rationalistic. The liberalism was born out of the Enlightenment triumph of reason, as it's sometimes called. But many people never accepted that triumph of reason. And I think that this is something, I write about this in my book at length, Patriots of Two Nations, that there is another version of America that objects to the idea that reason should rule over faith and tradition and intuition. And I think that actually rationalistic liberals need to listen to that. As alarmed as they are by people like Trump, and quite rightly alarmed by him, they need to realize that in a way, we rationalists created the opportunity for demagogic con artists like him to fill, because liberalism, by being almost exclusively rational, leaves aside everything that gives life meaning. And people, it turns out, can't bear to live a life that appears to be absent of meaning. It doesn't matter if the government is efficiently administrating its own organization and delivering services and all that sort of thing, if it appears that it's all completely pointless. And because ultimately people don't want to die feeling like it had just added up to nothing. They were alive and then they died and they disappear into the void. They want to feel they're part of something that means something. And you heard that amongst his followers on the street. As deluded as I think they are, there is an urge in the human heart to believe in something. And those people believe in Trump. And in part, rationalistic liberals bear some of the responsibility for that by leaving a void for an utter fraud to fill, because they did not address these matters of the heart and the spirit, which may not make rational sense, but which are there nevertheless.
Amy, what does it speak of the Americans, the American people who were supposed to be rationalists?
Right. Well,
if they believe in an illusion called Donald Trump.
Sure. And I like that he explained and described, the liberal as reasonable and rational, whereas I think that's more of the moderate position. I don't think that's necessarily just liberal. I would like to say that that's more of the moderate position at this time. I myself have been a Republican my entire voting life, and I do not call myself a conservative. I do not call myself a far right. I do not call myself a MAGA Republican. I actually have been describing myself as a reasonable and rational Republican, but that's also because I am more in the middle. I am a moderate, and I actually listen to the other side, and I have conversations with the other side. And I think that's where the majority of America actually is. And unfortunately, in a primary, you have the party devoted that pay very close attention, whether if that be the far right or the far left. And those happen to be the loudest voices that are involved in a primary, where you have your average voter that is more concerned about putting food on the table, making sure that their kids get to school. And then when it comes time for the general election, that's when they start to actually wake up and pay closer attention. So unfortunately, you get people like Donald Trump who will get through a primary and become the nominee, where I don't think he's going to do as well this time around, once again, when it is general time. I do think, unfortunately, that this debacle and this chaos is going to benefit him greatly, because the MAGA Republican is now considered more on the fringe and the far right. And they are hell-bent on making sure that their man makes it across the nomination process. So I think we're in for quite a ride this upcoming election. And I voted for Donald Trump twice. I do not want to see him as our nominee this time, but I fear that's what's going to happen.
But why do you say so? I mean, what changed your heart?
Well, it was a number of things. It actually was growing over time, but the final straw was January 6th. And when he was surrounding himself with lunatics, one right after the next, with Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood. I mean, these people were grifters, and they were just, they were lying through their teeth left and right and feeding his ego and capitalizing off of the chaos that they were creating. And he just kept right on surrounding himself with individuals like them. And it just got worse and worse. And then when January 6th took place and he allowed for his supporters to continue to go towards the Capitol without saying anything for several hours, I was extremely disgusted and disappointed.
So there would be how many like you, Amy, those who voted for Donald Trump twice, but they have had a change of heart post that incident?
Yes, no, I think that there are a number of us. Like I said, we are not the fringe, so you don't hear us maybe as loud, but there are a number of us. And I think President Biden actually was lucky. He was in the right place at the right time. And the only reason he is president today, it's not because he was an exceptional politician. It's because people were exhausted. And so it was a vote against Trump, plain and simple. I don't think President Biden is really what Democrats want either. I hear from all of my Democrat friends that they wish that there was a better option.
So here is Joe Biden, perhaps who's not the best, Stephen. That's what most Democrats feel. And here are Republicans pretty disillusioned and unhappy with Donald Trump. So will America be witnessing a new political figure emerge on the horizon?
Well, maybe not this election cycle. I think Amy made a great point, in effect, distinguishing between the two parts of our election. That is, there's the primaries, which result in the Republican nomination. And because of the makeup of the Republican Party, right now, Donald Trump has to be considered the favorite. He's gone up in the polls in recent weeks. So there's that. Then, if he's nominated, he probably has a weaker chance of beating Joe Biden, or conceivably, but not likely, another Democratic candidate in the general election, because he generates, I think justifiably, so much distrust, so much hostility, so much suspicion on the part not just of Democrats or people towards the left, but crucially on the part of people in the middle. I do agree we're in for quite a ride here, because this is not going to go away. And at least as long as he's seeking the Republican nomination, he's going to gin up as much hostility as possible. And just to build on something that I think Spencer was saying, in a more specific way, what he's doing is basically based on hostility, on hate. It's not a series of positive policies that, even though I disagree, conservatives have proposed or Republicans have proposed in past years or past decades. It's really telling people you should hate immigrants, you should hate minorities, you should hate East Coast elites, you should hate other people, you should hate transgender or gays, you should hate all sorts of people, and therefore rally around me. And that's what makes this demagoguery, the authoritarianism in Donald Trump, that much uglier, that much more dangerous.
I'm looking at what Judge Owen Marchant has written in the order, that the disclosure would be in the public interest and an appropriate exercise of this court's discretion. And this is according to the document. And we have seen a response that has come in from Donald Trump. So if there is this larger belief that it is in the public interest, so will the cameras be allowed, or will his lawyers' views that they have already submitted a document saying that there should not be any cameras, will that be given a priority? Amy?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Amy.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Well, like I mentioned, I actually think it would benefit to have the cameras, just so that way then the public could actually have transparency. But as earlier discussed, and I believe it was Stephen who pointed out that Trump would not be in control. So that's probably why they have decided not to have the cameras. So I could see both pros and cons, on either side. But I think overall, the American public would probably appreciate the transparency.
So this transparency that we are looking at, Stephen, the transparency would be like full court camera presence. But Donald Trump, if he doesn't want it, then perhaps the accused gets the benefit, right? How does it really play out in American courts? Stephen?
I'm sorry, you're saying someone gets the benefit. Who?
I'm trying to understand if Donald Trump's team of lawyers have said that they do not want cameras because that is like going, which will be more of a circus, then will the court be listening to him, or will it be about transparency and public interest, as Judge Juan Merchan has said?
They may, as a legal matter, and I'm not positive about this, but as a legal matter, they may have to defer to the defense team for the trial, in the sense that I believe the defense team can say, no, we don't want cameras, and that's the end of it. As a matter of transparency in the public interest, yes, I think it would be wonderful. It would be great for people across the spectrum to see this trial, to learn about the issues in a way that they can't learn from simply reading the write-ups, to see what's going on in the courtroom with their own eyes. So I completely agree with that sentiment that, yes, let's make it transparent. But I'm skeptical about whether the defense team will go for that, because the kind of spectacle they have in court, they won't have that much of a spectacle. The judge will control the court. If Donald Trump tries to get out of control in the court, he'll be slapped down figuratively. There may even be a gag order on his shouting in the court and other types of tactics, or other types of ridiculous moves. And the judge will control the court, as judges are doing, as they're entitled to do. So I think the circus, again, will be outside the court. And even though we would like to have a transparent, sober trial conducted, and we may well have that, it's not in Donald Trump's interest to submit to that.
Okay, Edward Joseph, Senior Fellow at SAIS, Foreign Policy Institute from Washington, D.C., is joining us as well. Edward, so the larger sense is that Donald Trump doesn't want cameras inside, but there is this view that in public interest and in full disclosure, they would want to have cameras. So I'm trying to understand from you, with Donald Trump having said that the judges hate him, will it really complicate matters?
Well, first of all, let's put this whole episode into context. This is a welcome step for Donald Trump. Anyone who thinks that being this indictment is somehow damaging or something that he is deeply concerned about doesn't know Donald Trump or understand him at all. This is welcome to him. All this attention, this is exactly what he wants as he struggles in polling as a candidate against the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis. And for Ron DeSantis, this is the worst thing that could have happened. This just allows Trump to be exactly where he wants to be, which is the center of attention and in an aggrieved posture. This is straight up for Donald Trump. See, they're going after me. They're crucifying me because I'm what stands between them, the elite, and you. And so this is all welcome to Donald Trump, and he will play all of these questions, including camera in the courtroom, as to how he believes this will best position himself publicly. Now, my understanding is in New York, the law is that generally cameras are not allowed. It's not the standard in New York, and this is that's the jurisdiction here. It's New York, but that they can be allowed under certain circumstances, and obviously that will be a determination of the judge. So we have, and then finally, I just point out that this is an arraignment, and your viewers should understand that this is a formal procedure in the United States. We come from English common law. This is protecting the right of an accused to be brought before the judge and to be identified and presented with the accusations against him. But this is not the trial. He's not going to be presented with any evidence at this arraignment. It's just simply that formality of bringing him before the judge, and it's likely to be a reasonably short procedure. Please.
Okay, so Edward, you are saying that this is going to be politically advantageous for Donald Trump. So just help us understand what happens now when he arrives in New York and goes to the Manhattan court.
Okay, if this question is for me, yeah.
Yes.
He will. So there's a question, of course, as to whether he would be put in handcuffs or not. If they're wise, the police and the judicial administration will not do that, and I anticipate that they will not do that. Why? What would be the? There's no need to do that, to add that additional layer of anger to Donald Trump's supporters. So I doubt that they will do that. He'll be brought in, be identified. He'll be fingerprinted. He will be photographed for identification. And there's a question of whether or not those photographs that we in the United States, we call those mug shots, will be released. And again, I expect Donald Trump would want those to be released, again, to show how he's being unfairly treated, and this is all a political persecution in his terms, and that'll be more fodder for that. And he'll be taken into a probably, instead of a cell, probably a holding room, in which he and his lawyer or lawyers will wait, and then he'll be brought before the judge, and the judge will present him with this arraignment. He'll be presented with the charges, and those charges, that indictment, will be then publicly released. And so that we can stop speculating about the nature of the charges, and we can see what those formally were. And again, under our system, those charges are approved by what we call a grand jury, that is presented with the evidence, but it's not an adversarial proceeding. It's presented with the evidence by the prosecutor, and the prosecutor brings in witnesses, and this grand jury does not decide on the guilt of Donald Trump. That grand jury only decides whether the standard has been met to proceed with a trial, to bring those forward for prosecution before a judge.
Edward, how do you explain the argument which I've been reading somewhere? One of the lawyers said that the federal investigation into this matter was closed in 2019, which in fact suggested that the weight of evidence was not really, stacked up in, it wasn't really complete. Then it begins again just a year before the elections. So there, if anything, this is about political persecution.
It's complicated, and it's very difficult to speculate on this. Let me say, it's a reasonable question that you ask, and everyone asks, is, well, what is the nature of the charges here? It's a little, it's difficult to follow, particularly if one is not steeped in U.S. prosecution, and particularly under New York law. But there was a serious investigation by the previous prosecutor for Manhattan, and that was Cyrus Vance Jr. He, by the way, was the son of the former Secretary of State, Cyrus Vance. And they decided, for whatever reason, not to go forward. Then the new prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, came in, and there's reporting that he decided also not to go forward, and then faced resignations. Two of his top prosecutors who had worked on this resigned in protest at Bragg's refusal to go forward. In other words, they felt, these prosecutors were convinced that there was more than ample evidence here, and that apparently, according to reports, prompted Bragg to re-examine the evidence here. Again, in the end, this is a matter of evidence. In the United States, these are courts, these are judges, and someone is brought before, and the prosecutor has to present evidence and succeed. And if he fails to present that evidence, and that's beyond a reasonable doubt. Remember, in a criminal case, we have a high standard that a prosecutor has to clear. It has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. So if the defense can create any doubt about the evidence, the judge, or if there's a jury, can and is obligated then to declare not guilty. So it's not so easy to just convict someone in a court in the United States, but we have to see what the actual charges are, whether they're what we call a misdemeanor or a felony, if there's novel theories that they're using, or if these are basically straightforward types of accusations. Please.
Yes, and Edward, one more point, that Donald Trump's critics had celebrated the indictment as a sign that no one is above the law in America. But the larger question then is of how are the ordinary citizens or Republicans viewing this? Because there is a great degree of sympathy and also an understanding that it is Donald Trump who can make America great again. So if anything, can he really convert this into a spectacle which can prove advantageous to him?
Yeah, as I said at the outset, this is all totally welcome to Donald Trump, and turning this into a spectacle, a circus, this is what he thrives on. He lives to be the center of attention and controversy. And being in this embattled position. This is perfect for what Donald Trump wants. As for making America great again, he had 4 years to do that. And all he succeeded in doing was making America more divided against itself than it has ever been. Exaggeration, and I think even many of his supporters would acknowledge that that's the case. They would just say, "Oh, well, he was right." But this is not a president who made America great again, and he faced the test, which in democracies you face, and in India governments face, which is you have to go before the people, and the people tell you whether you've succeeded in your agenda to make America great again, and he lost. And in the United States, it's actually pretty hard to lose the election as a president. The president has a lot of advantages, and Donald Trump lost. And it's been shown, we now know it's becoming more and more clear that the election was absolutely fair, and that those who said it wasn't were in fact, in this case in Fox News, it's becoming clear in the lawsuit that they were lying about it. So Joe Biden did win, and he won fair and square, and that means Donald Trump did not carry through the confidence of the American people, and he lost that election. So yes, in this case, he wants to run again. He's a declared candidate. And again, he was struggling because you have to understand, your viewers have to understand, in order to be the Republican nominee, he will face competition. And he has competition from this Governor DeSantis of Florida and others who have already, there are others who have declared against Donald Trump. So he welcomes this. He wants this attention. He wants to be the center of controversy. He's got all these Republicans backing him, saying this is an unfair persecution of Donald Trump. So this is all tailor-made for what Donald Trump likes, which is attention. Please.
Yes, but talking about, it may be all right to get all the sort of spotlight on yourself when it is an election year, but this is a legal case. And with the kind of statements that he has made against the the attorney here, the district attorney Alvin Bragg, and then has called the judges that they hate him, will it not complicate matters for him?
Yes, and I've read it could, in the sense that judges are human beings, and when you hear something like that, perhaps that could have some effect. But on the other hand, a judge is supposed to not let those things affect him. But in this case, this judge, Marchand, what's interesting is he was the judge who presided in the case against the Trump organization, in which the Trump organization was found culpable. This is the same judge. So what's interesting, and that's one reason why Trump is targeting him with these sharp accusations. But what, on the other hand, it means that the judge is very familiar with Donald Trump, very familiar with his associates, with the business practices, with the legal issues at stake. So that's unusual here. The judge has great familiarity with this material and the organization, and potentially none of the witnesses probably will come as any surprise to him. So that's an interesting facet. But the other thing is that we know this is Donald Trump. Donald Trump never listens to anyone about advice on being calm and cautious. He, as a president, he was tweeting sometimes outrageous, even dangerous comments. He incited this crowd. He incited the crowd to go attack the Capitol. This is not a man who knows self-restraint. And as I read in a report, he had on his own social media website, he had a very provocative comment, and I believe some pictures about the judge, that his advisors apparently finally did convince him to take it down. Please.
And Edward, if we were to look at the approval rating or the surveys that have been conducted, I was looking at the CNN SSRS poll, which was released on Monday. 60% of Americans approved of this indictment, although about 3/4 of the respondents believed politics played at least some role in this decision, including 52% who said it played a major role. So in terms of the larger perception in the United States, is Donald Trump winning that battle?
We will have to wait to see that. But those are interesting surveys that you quote, but you note that they are mixed. They're contradictory. And again, we have to wait. First, we have to wait and hear what these charges actually are. There's just speculation in the press so far. And then maybe accurate, maybe turn out to be accurate, but we need to see the full indictment, see what he's charged with. So that's where it stands. And that should at least go some measure, if assuming that these are capable prosecutors and that they have put together a sound case. If they have put together a sound case, this will be public, and it will go some measure potentially to steering away that it was only political. But everyone has to understand that this unprecedented act of indicting a former president is, of course, loaded with political import. It's impossible not to consider the political ramifications here. That would be not possible or not credible. It's really about the evidence. That's what matters here. What kind of indictment? Is this straightforward, these charges, or does it involve some kind of new type of legal argumentation that makes sure that it's still timely, as we have what we call a statute of limitations? Does it look like the prosecutors are straining to hold him accountable, or does it look like they're just following the evidence and doing their duty to hold him, as we like to say here, that no one is above the law? And on our Supreme Court, and that Romanesque building with the columns at the top in the frieze, it says equal justice under law. And we've had the cases where the famous case of President Nixon being held accountable even while he was president. So that's the other element here, is that our democracy prides itself on that concept of equal justice under law, and there's a heavy burden here. Again, the real burden here is on these prosecutors to demonstrate that they are doing their duty to hold Donald Trump accountable and not straining to make a name for themselves or create a splash of some kind by cobbling together arguments. And that, again, we will have to wait and see for what that indictment says and whether people find it convincing. Please.
Edward, here is Donald Trump, who has faced double impeachment. In fact, it was an exhausting saga, certainly. There was false claims of a stolen election, then mob attack on the US Congress during his four-year presidency. I mean, it was one of the most polarizing times in the United States. And here he is, again, having a spotlight on himself, going ahead and saying that he believes that the judges hate him. And then he is continuing with his characteristically aggressive attack. That's quintessential Donald Trump. So he will obviously not plead guilty. then what will be the arrangement going forward? Which means he will not be handcuffed. Will there be a mugshot that will be taken in the court, or will he be allowed to go? So will it be a very brief proceeding which will be playing out in the court?
What I expect is that this will be a straightforward process. Again, this is an arraignment. The viewers really have to understand that this is a preliminary first step part of our judicial process, where you bring the accused before the court, where the accused is presented with the charges. The accused is formally entered into the judicial system. That there's a process of photographing and fingerprinting for identification purposes, and that will take place. That will take place, I expect, outside of press cameras. So I imagine that would take those formalities would take place, and then this other formality of being presented with the charges will be taken, and he will be presented with the charges, and the lawyers will. And I anticipate this will be a fairly short proceeding, and I would imagine he will be released at that time. And occasionally they ask defendants to post bail, that is to put up cash money to ensure that they will appear on future proceedings. I don't anticipate that they will do that, and I think it'll be fairly straightforward. And for the prosecution, they should try to keep it straightforward, because the focus that they want is on the indictment. That's what's critical here, not circus in the courtroom. That would be not good at all for either the judge or the prosecution. The defense would like create a circus, but I think they will not want that. And the public interest is really not the circus either, but to see what are the actual charges, what we call here an indictment. Please.
Edward, stay with us. There is a special report on Donald Trump and this entire historic arraignment that the United States is witnessing, and the world too.
The office of former U.S. President Donald Trump says he'll speak in Florida on Tuesday following his arraignment in New York City. Trump is expected to be fingerprinted and photographed in a Manhattan courthouse as he becomes the first former president to face criminal charges. He's set to fly from Palm Beach to New York Monday, where he will spend the night at Trump Tower before his court appearance the next day. On Sunday, Trump asked for contributions to his 2024 re-election campaign in a video post to Truth Social, his self-founded social media platform.
If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, it would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it.
Trump was arraigned in New York after an indictment by grand jury that heard evidence on hush money paid to porn star Stormy Daniels ahead of the 2016 election. Trump describes the probe as a political witch hunt. Some of his top supporters, including Republican lawmaker Marjorie Taylor Greene, say they will go to New York on Tuesday to protest. Officials at the Manhattan courthouse said they will shut down some courtrooms ahead of Trump's expected appearance. Trump lawyer Joe Tacopina told ABC on Sunday he plans to move to dismiss the charges. But he stopped short of doubling down on Trump's claim that the judge in the case, Justice Juan Merchan, is biased. Merchan also presided over a criminal trial last year in which Trump's real estate company was convicted of tax fraud, though Trump himself was not charged. Trump's office said he will fly from his arraignment back to Palm Beach Tuesday evening, where he will speak from his Mar-a-Lago estate.
I think the American people see that. It's the very essence of the abuse of the prosecutive function, which is pursuing a person rather than pursuing a real crime. The case, based again on what's being reported, the case lacks any legal basis. It's pursuing somebody on the, there's nothing inherently wrong or illegal about making a hush payment. They're saying he falsified the corporate record. But for that to even be a misdemeanor, you have to be trying to defraud somebody, and it's unclear exactly who's defrauded. This is his own company.
I have made a decision, and my decision is I'm going to run for President of the United States. First of all, the office is more important than any individual person. And so for the sake of the office of the presidency, I do think that's too much of a sideshow and distraction, and he needs to be able to concentrate on his due process, and there is a presumption of innocence.
Now he turns around purely for political purposes and indicts a former president on misdemeanor offenses that they're straining to try to convert into felonies. That is when you know that the law has been weaponized for political purposes. That is when you know that the left is using that to target their political opponents.
We are now officially a third world country. No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks. But they only attack me because I fight for you. It's very simple. They can't buy me and they can't control me, and that scares them beyond belief. Since the very beginning, I've shunned the globalist special interest donors who have made a fortune off of destroying our country. Instead, our presidential campaign has always been funded by grassroots patriots like you. Your contribution today will show the left that nothing can destroy the greatest political movement in history. This is the greatest movement in political history. There's never been anything like it. Even the fake news media, when they hear me say that, they can't challenge it because it's true. And you think about what we did in 2016, and then we did even better by many millions and millions of votes in 2020, but the election was rigged and stolen. But now we're going to take back our country in 2024. If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, it would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it, because they're going to have billions of dollars fighting to make this a communist country, and that's what they're doing. They skipped socialism. The train didn't stop at that station. In just a couple of years, our country is going to be richer, stronger, and greater than ever before. But that's only if we win in 2024. Otherwise, our country will continue to fail. Our country will be a disaster.
Security is already in place in New York City. Given the political sensitivities of the case, and after Trump warned of a potential death and destruction ahead of being charged, especially given his past, call that came for Capitol insurrection. So far, Edward, Donald Trump's call for any kind of protests haven't really seen a lot of protesters or supporters of his on the streets. Why is that the case?
Well, first we have to see what will materialize. In this case, Donald Trump has to be very careful because of the legacy of January 6th, 2021, when he incited that, and we all heard him with those comments he made on that day, and when when the supporters went and then eventually stormed the Capitol, and he waited hours before doing anything about it, before communicating to them to stop. And the danger was present there. There was had it not been for fast work by the police and the Capitol Hill police and security personnel, some of these members of Congress might have been killed following that incitement. So he has to be very careful, President Trump, about what he says publicly in terms of for calling for protests. You hear what he's calling for. He's calling for money. That's what he's calling for. He wants to turn this to get a financial boost for his campaign out of this, and of course, and then leverage that against his Republican opponents. Remember, your viewers have to understand this. He's not running against Joe Biden right now.
Right.
He's running against other Republicans. That's what Donald Trump is doing. So his competition right now is not Joe Biden. Even you hear some references to Joe Biden. That's not his competition. His competition is other Republican candidates, and that's why he wants to gather in all the attention, leave these other ones, keep the spotlight on him as the defender, the true defender of the interests of his followers, and to overshadow all those other Republican challengers. That's what he wants, and that's why, as I said, this is in some ways welcome to him. And again, we have to see these charges. We have to see if they are clear and straightforward, or if they require some innovative legal thinking to go forward. Please.
So, if we were to look at potential charges, will it lead to serving a sentence as well? Serving a term?
That depends on it depends on whether he's convicted. Obviously, these are criminal charges. Presumably, they're a felony. If it's just a misdemeanor, which we consider a lower thing, that they would bring that. But you know, the speculation, you heard it before, is that this has to do with the way an alleged payment was recorded. So again, it rests with the prosecution, how much evidence, how they fit the evidence with the law. And of course, we have to remember one other step was referred to by one of Trump's lawyers, is that they will have a motion to dismiss. So it may be unlikely, but we have to understand that the judge will have an opportunity, if he believes that the prosecutor has failed to make what we call a prima facie case. That's a basic case on the merits, that it doesn't rise to the level of a crime. The judge can actually dismiss the case without any further procedure, without even hearing the evidence. So we have to wait, and we have to wait till tomorrow. So we have to see what's in the indictment.
As we said, that this is unprecedented times in America and also for the world. Thank you so much for your time, Edward. Ray Locker and Senator Paul Strauss are joining us now to decode this story and help us understand what is it going to be. Senator Paul Strauss, really appreciate your time. This is a never before article of a former president showing up for a first court appearance in United States. What does it actually mean for Donald Trump, according to you?
Well, I mean, for Donald Trump, it means accountability, which is something that throughout his career and his life, he hasn't really had a chance to deal with. He's been getting away with so much, whether it's been his shady business dealings as a real estate person or the crimes he committed while in office. He's the only president to have been impeached twice. That's the way we go after presidents when they have committed high crimes and misdemeanors under the Constitution. So the House of Representatives charged him with 2 sets of misconduct allegations. The Senate didn't convict because it's a high bar. But now that he's back to being a private citizen, he no longer has the protections of the office. And so things that he has done, he must be held to be account for. And this is a local prosecution by the district attorney for the borough of Manhattan in the county of New York. And they have alleged that a grand jury, that is his fellow Americans, have voted to indict him, which is charged with a crime. Now, we don't know the specifics of that. It's confidential, it's sealed, it will be open tomorrow. But the former president of the United States is going to be hauled before a judge to answer criminal charges for the first time in American history. And that is a pretty shocking thing for those of us in this world's oldest democracy.
Would you explain to us, will there be fingerprinting? Will there be taking of a mugshot?
Those are the standard procedures. And typically when you're arraigned, you may even be handcuffed, but it's not necessarily a requirement. And I think you're going to find that the local magistrate there will do everything he can to preserve our nation's collective dignity by going through the process to show that he's not getting any special treatment. But we certainly don't want to go out of their way to politicize this or to take steps that may not be necessary. The most important part in a preliminary hearing is to ensure that the defendant will return to court for the actual trial. And so he'll be there, he'll speak through his lawyers. He's not likely to say anything directly to the judge, and he will enter a plea. Typically, a defendant at this stage of the proceeding will enter a plea of not guilty, and then the judge will set a scheduling order that may talk about what happens for the rest of the case. It may be as simple as the filing of preliminary motions. So not a lot may be done tomorrow, but just the very fact that a president is compelled to appear before a judge to answer serious criminal charges is just something very unusual for us. It's a very sad day, regardless of the ultimate outcome. It's a sad day for Donald Trump, of course, but I think it's a sad day for the United States that we have gotten to this point and that we were once led by a man whose moral character is so deficient.
Yes, and this is for the first time in American history that a current or a former president has faced criminal charges. Ray Locker is back with us as well. Ray, you know, New York certainly isn't really a place which is believed to be of the Republicans, and that is the reason why there are no protests that we are hearing of till now. But would Donald Trump have wanted protests along the way till Manhattan Court when he would have landed? When he lands?
Oh, I'm sure he'd like to have some kind of demonstration of support. I think he's going to be disappointed. I think one of your previous speakers said, you know, he doesn't want to have anything like January 6th. And I think his supporters don't want that either. They saw what happened then, and they don't want to risk a repeat performance. So he's going to be disappointed if he thinks there's going to be this huge outcry. I think there'll be enough security to kind of tamp that down. I think the most support he's going to get is on TV and on social media.
And that's it? As far as supporters are concerned, are they actually, you know, decreasing? Because we had Amy who said that she voted for Trump, in fact, for Republicans twice, but this time she's really disappointed with this indictment.
Well, I mean, people are disappointed with the indictment.
Yes, please, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah. They're disappointed with the indictment, but it doesn't mean they're going to go out and protest. I mean, people are disappointed by a lot of stuff out on the streets of Manhattan and wave a sign, particularly for a guy, as a senator knows, has been impeached twice. I mean, Trump has got a very sorry track record. It's amazing that it's taken this long for him to be indicted for something. He would have been indicted for something if he was president, but there's a legal opinion from 1973 that says a sitting president can't be indicted. It's always been a matter of time for Trump. And I think that a number of people who are willing to go out in the streets for him is diminishing rapidly.
Yes, when we look at this Trump's historic indictment as it is being put, you know, Senator Paul, when we look at these developments, and particularly that Trump's team doesn't want cameras inside the courtroom, they do not want any media presence because, of course, they will not be able to control the entire reaction of Donald Trump, perhaps, because he would want to make his first appearance in a more controlled way when he speaks in Florida tomorrow. What is it that they would be thinking when they say that they do not want a circus in the court?
But nobody wants a circus in the court. We want these proceedings to be dignified, and it's not typical for cameras to be permitted in the courtroom, which is why sometimes when you look at images from American trials, you see an old-fashioned sketch artist, and that's how we get visuals. Someone goes into the court and literally with a pen and paper, they draw a sketch that shows you what may be happening. This is a sad day for us. I mean, I'm happy that he's being held accountable. I'm happy that no one is above the law and our system is working. But for it to have come to this, for America to have been led by such a depraved and indifferent to morality character as Donald Trump, is the culmination of a very, very sad era for us. And it is the beginning of that accountability. But it is important. In a democracy, the most important title is not president, it's not senator, it's not judge, it is citizen. And it will be citizen Donald Trump that will be held accountable tomorrow by a process in which ultimately he will be judged by a jury of his peers, his fellow New Yorkers. And so New York City might not be a Republican stronghold, but that's where this case is being brought because that's where Donald Trump lived for many, many years. That's where he made the money that has been misused in the way that it has been. And so it will ultimately be his fellow New Yorkers that will hold him accountable for the crimes he committed in New York. He faces other potential charges. The federal government, the Department of Justice, is looking at his role in January 6th as well. He may be calling for protesters. And remember, peaceful protest is a hallmark of our democracy. But what we're really worried about are the fact that Donald Trump has a way of inciting his followers to violence. We saw that on January 6th. And we've seen that tangentially. You know, there was an attack on Nancy Pelosi's elderly husband by a man who entered the house with a hammer. You know, Donald Trump may not have said, go to this person's house with a hammer, but his rhetoric has a way of bringing out violent tendencies of people. And that's what we're really worried about. So security will be tight. We don't want a circus in the courtroom. We want this process to proceed orderly. And if he's guilty, he should be punished. And if for some reason he's found not guilty, then, you know, at least the process, at least he's had his day in court. But I suspect that the evidence is pretty overwhelming, especially given that this stems from conduct by his former lawyer, Michael Cohen. Mr. Cohen has already pled guilty. So even though the indictment is unsealed, a lot of the facts are already known by the American people, and the charges are serious.
But Paul, the entire investigation ended in 2019, but it has resurfaced again this time around. So there is a view of experts who believe that perhaps the evidence may not be that overwhelming.
I think we're going to know tomorrow, but the evidence was sufficient to have him charged with a crime. The evidence is sufficient to compel him to appear. And I suspect that the evidence will be sufficient to bring him to trial. It would be unwise to try and predict the outcome of a trial that hasn't begun. But the important lesson is that for the first time in Donald Trump's life and for the first time in our nation's history, a former president will be held to account for his actions. And it sends an important message. It sends an important message to Donald Trump. It sends an important message to the American people. And it sends an important message to people around the world that it doesn't matter who you are, how rich, how powerful, what office you hold in the United States. If you break the law, you are subject to prosecution for violations of those laws. And that is an important element in keeping a society free and keeping a democracy functioning. We want an independent judiciary. We don't want this political, and it's not political. Donald Trump is being brought to trial because a grand jury has probable cause to believe that he committed serious crimes, and he will be judged for those crimes.
And this is an extreme test for America, Ray Locker. America will be waking up to what kind of headlines in New York Times and Washington Post?
Well, it's a big test. I mean, I think a lot of people know that it's happening. I don't think they're particularly spun up about it. I mean, the partisans on both sides are excited. But you know, it's sad. I mean, we don't like to see this happening as a country because it does smack of kind of third world nations where people's political opponents get tossed in prison for one reason or another. But But look, Trump earned this. It's only been a matter of time before he ended up in a situation like this. And I mean, he's got 3 other cases: January 6th, the insurrection, the documents that he took from the White House after he left office, all those classified documents, and what looks like obstruction of justice in that situation, and the attempt to try to steal the results of the Georgia election in 2020. I mean, the grand jury has already issued a report there. So this is not going to be the last time that Trump is indicted. It might be the first of 4. And he's going to spend a lot of time over the next 18 months between now and the election, assuming he's the nominee, dealing with legal problems of his own making.
So we are looking at those visuals tracking Trump's journey from Florida to New York City. We have that live shot now coming from Trump Towers and also La Guardia Airport, where Donald Trump's aircraft is going to land any moment, and then he heads to Manhattan Court, where his indictment, in fact, he will be arraigning himself, and then the entire process will begin. Paul, would you say that given the nature of cases that are there against Donald Trump, what makes it perhaps morally more concerning for him and the Republicans is this extramarital encounter for which he is being charged?
I think that's actually the least important aspect of this. This is not he's not charged with having an affair. He's not charged for his personal conduct or whatever he may or may not have done with Ms. Daniels. This is a charge of serious financial crimes, because under the law, you have to account for the way businesses spend their money, and you're required to be truthful when you report your expenses and your income. And when you are a candidate for office, if you spend money for the purpose of influencing an election, you have to truthfully account and disclose all of the things that you have done financially to influence an election. And if you withhold an expense that you made for the purpose of influencing an election, you have violated the crimes on our election laws. And so this is not the first time a president has been accused of misconduct, either with the election or financial crimes. But most of them in the past, when confronted with this evidence, have done the honorable thing and resigned. Richard Nixon, hardly an example of sound moral leadership, at least took steps to preserve his dignity and the dignity of the office and resigned. His vice president before that, Spiro Agnew, also resigned. And so we have had officials in all branches of government who, at the appropriate point in time, if wrongful or illegal conduct is discovered, have taken steps to minimize the dishonor that they're bringing to the public office. Donald Trump has done just the opposite. He continues to compound these accusations of misconduct with actions that don't show that he's remorseful, don't show that he's interested in taking accountability at all steps. Whether it's January 6th, whether it's blaming Michael Cohen, whether all of these things, he always seeks to shift the blame to others, never take responsibility for himself. That ends tomorrow. And so I don't know that the headlines that we're going to wake up to tomorrow are going to be particularly significant. But on Wednesday, after the indictment is unsealed, after Donald Trump has been arraigned, after a plea has been entered in a criminal case, that Wednesday morning, those headlines are going to be historic.
And, though the former president, as reports are suggesting, was pretty stunned by the indictment at first, after 24 hours, his reaction, Ray Locker, was that he wanted to politically rub them up. So the point being made here by Paul is largely his reaction, which has been there. There has been, in case of his predecessor, they accepted it and perhaps stepped down. Here is Donald Trump, who's saying that United States has become a third world country, and only because he was fighting for his people, that's the reason why he's facing this. This victim card, how long can he continue to play that?
Until he's dead. I mean, he's been doing that his whole life. I mean, here's a guy who claims he's this big winner. I mean, he's the most successful businessman ever, but he's a victim all the time. I don't know how you pull that off. Everybody's picking on him. He's the only one who gets this kind of treatment. Well, mostly because he's the only person like this we've really had become president. I mean, I've written 2 books about Richard Nixon. I mean, he did a lot of things that deservedly caused him problems. He's nothing like Donald Trump. I mean, nothing. He at least tried to do the right thing. And with Trump, he doesn't even try. And to follow up on something that Paul said earlier, the headlines that are going to come out on Wednesday are going to be big because we're going to see the particulars of this indictment. And once you do that, then you're going to see what kind of evidence the prosecution has to bring this indictment. And people can compare the allegations made in the indictment with other things that Trump may have done. And maybe we'll find out that, hey, what happened with Stormy Daniels and all the machinations leading up to that payoff were not a one-off, that were just part of the way this guy does business. And we saw a little bit of that in the civil suit against the Trump organization, which how they, claim the value of property was one thing for tax purposes, elevated it to get a loan. That's how he does business. And I think we're going to see more of that in this indictment. And as far as Michael Cohen's concerned, to try to pin it all on this guy who was nothing but a gopher for Trump for years is ludicrous. And Cohen's getting a little bit of his revenge for being, tossed under the bus after things started to go south.
So where does it lead to other people in the Trump camp? If here is someone who turns against him and then he's thrown under the bus because he realizes, of course, it started going south. What about other people in his team, Paul?
I think that the folks that work for Donald Trump understand that if you show Donald Trump loyalty, he does not reciprocate it to you. And that has been a hard lesson for people to learn, whether it was his trusted lawyer like Michael Cohen or whether it was the thousands of people that answered his call to attack the Capitol on January 6th. Donald Trump looks out only for Donald Trump, first and foremost. Anybody else he considers expendable. He doesn't put his supporters first. He doesn't put his associates first. He puts Donald Trump first. And as shameful as Richard Nixon's conduct may have been back in the day, at the end of that day, Richard Nixon put the welfare of the nation first, something Donald Trump has never done. And I don't think this makes us a third world country. I think this sets an example to the world that we honor the rule of law and that it doesn't matter whether you're a rich person, it doesn't matter whether you're a powerful person, it doesn't matter whether you once held the highest office of the land. If you break the law, you will face accountability. And for that reason, what's going to happen tomorrow is painful, but it's important for the integrity of our democratic society, for the third branch of government, the judiciary, to hold accountable members of the executive branch, even though they may no longer hold office.
Of course, this is completely unprecedented. How would you react to some Republicans saying that this is weaponization of the judicial system, Paul?
I think they're the ones who are using this for a political advantage. The truth is, it's not a political advantage necessarily for us. Donald Trump is using these charges to raise money, to campaign on, to benefit from the free publicity. And so if this is not some extension of the strategy of one political party, this is a public prosecutor who is going about his business of enforcing the law in the face of clear evidence. It's just taken a little longer. One, because when these charges first came to that office's attention, the federal government asked them to defer while a federal prosecution went forward. And of course, that was the investigation that ultimately led Mr. Cohen to plead guilty. So this is the continuation of a process that started when the charges were first discovered. I don't think it's political. It's certainly not a big advantage to the Democratic Party. I think it's getting a lot of free TV time for Republicans who are going on TV to rile up their base. Hopefully, though, it won't be an incitement to violence. We won't see extremists using this as an opportunity to hurt people. Donald Trump is being charged with crimes about his financial integrity and the representations he's made when compelled by the law to be truthful and alleged to have lied under those circumstances, either under oath or in direct violation of certain statutes. So I don't think this is political. I understand why some Republicans say that, but not all. There are many Republicans, too few in my opinion, but enough, who are recognizing that this is an important step in the preservation of the rule of law. And I think that at the end of the day, when this spectacle ends, the United States will be stronger as a nation, our democracy will be stronger, and we can put some distance between ourselves and what have been a series of
Are
very
you
tragic
actually
events.
expecting the spectacle to end, or is this the beginning of a spectacle, a long one perhaps?
This trial will come to its conclusion and a verdict will be rendered. Other investigations may result in other charges being brought against Donald Trump, and that process will play out as well. We have a history of guaranteeing what we like to call the speedy trial in the United States, but even a speedy trial by US standard can take months, sometimes years. And so it may not be another year until we get through this process. But one day, the charges against Donald Trump will have been brought. He will be tried. He will be either convicted or acquitted as the evidence dictates. And America will be able to move on. And the world's oldest democracy will hopefully continue as a democratic nation. And
Yes,
so,
but you'll have also someone who can still run for the president even though he's been indicted. So that's the concern as well. So stay with us. Stay with us. I'm going to play that soundbite of Donald Trump and I'm going to come back to both of you.
A third world country. No president in the history of our country has been subjected to such vicious and disgusting attacks. But they only attack me because I fight for you. It's very simple. They can't buy me and they can't control me, and that scares them beyond belief. Since the very beginning, I've shunned the globalist special interest donors who have made a fortune off of destroying our country. Instead, our presidential campaign has always been funded by grassroots patriots like you. Your contribution today will show the left that nothing can destroy the greatest political movement in history. This is the greatest movement in political history. There's never been anything like it. Even the fake news media, when they hear me say that, they can't challenge it because it's true. And you think about what we did in 2016, and then we did even better by many millions and millions of votes in 2020, but the election was rigged and stolen. But now we're going to take back our country in 2024. If you're doing poorly because of Biden's disastrous policies, don't even think about making a contribution to our campaign. You and your family always come first. Our movement is about making your life better and putting you first. So I don't want you to incur any financial costs that you can't afford. But if you're doing well because all of the things that I've done have brought you wealth and prosperity, or at least you're extremely comfortable, it would be really great if you could contribute to our campaign. You know how to do it, because they're going to have billions of dollars fighting to make this a communist country, and that's what they're doing. They skipped socialism. The train didn't stop at that station. In just a couple of years, our country is going to be richer, stronger, and greater than ever before. But that's only if we win in 2024. Otherwise, our country will continue to fail. Our country will be a disaster.
Ray Locker, we are getting the first visuals of Trump's aircraft about to land in New York City, where he will be heading to Trump Tower and then Manhattan Court. The question then is, will he be getting some support of his, supporters on the streets, or will it be all the calls, all the efforts of rallying them behind him failing? So all that will be subject of great public viewing, certainly. But Ray Locker, Donald Trump has become the first U.S. president to be indicted, and he will be arraigning before the court. But the larger question is, he can still run for president, even though he's indicted.
Innocent until proven guilty. I mean, that's the American system. There aren't many people who have the nerve to continue to run for president after they've been indicted of a crime while they're under investigation for multiple crimes, but that's Donald Trump. That's how he rolls. That's what he does. He doesn't care about that. He thinks it's fuel for whatever alleged movement he has. He uses it as a way to get money. I mean, it's pretty much pretty astounding, but that's what he does.
And do people believe in him?
Well, yeah, they believe in him, but I mean, it's a smaller and smaller group of people. I'm not sure what they believe in. I mean, his presidency was pretty much of a disaster. He totally mismanaged the COVID pandemic. We had 1 million people die in this country. He was telling people in front of, the press in the White House that they should inject bleach. He told Bob Woodward that he lied to the public when he said it wasn't a big deal. I mean, how many things? I've run out of fingers and toes to count all the times that he's lied to people. He's made disastrous opinions. And yet there are people who support him because he says what they want to hear.
And here is Donald Trump.
I don't know what their motives are, but they like him.
Ray, just hold on to your thoughts. We are getting the first visuals of Donald Trump landing in New York. He is being accompanied by his wife, Melania, the daughter, Ivanka, son, Jared, and all of them are present with Donald Trump, along with his team of lawyers. Paul, when we look at these visuals, of course, there is a U.S. President, the former U.S. president, coming to ensuring that he is not above the law. But it also means that America is entering a very tough time as far as, and tough testing time as far as its legal, potential is concerned.
I don't think so. I think we're coming into a time of strength for our democracy. We are going through the process that we need to go through, which is when evidence of a crime committed by a former president is presented, the process plays out. Like any criminal defendant, he's entitled to have the support of his family. He's entitled to good legal counsel of his choosing. And so he will get the same rights that a criminal defendant gets who has never been